I sat in a high-rise office in downtown Seattle, ready to tell my husband our financial nightmares were finally over. I had just inherited $20 million. But as I pulled out my phone to share the news, the estate attorney placed his hand over mine. "Ma'am," he said quietly, looking at a thick manila folder, "our records show your divorce was finalized 2 months ago." I froze for 5 seconds, then I made my move. "My name is Rebecca. I am 33 years old, and I work as a senior data analyst for a logistics firm. For the past 6 years, I believed I was building a solid and loving marriage with my husband, Gavin, a tech sales executive who always seemed to be chasing the next big promotion. We lived in a quiet suburb, struggling through the usual financial hurdles of modern life, constantly stressed about mortgages and credit card bills. But last Tuesday, everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man I loved was shattered in a single afternoon. Before I continue the story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to someone who underestimated your worth. The rain was beating gently against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the trust attorney's office in downtown Seattle. The room smelled of expensive leather and old paper. I sat in a plush wingback chair across from Harrison Cole, the executor of my estranged great-aunt's estate. Harrison was a meticulous man with silver hair and a very serious demeanor. For the last hour, we had been going over pages upon pages of dense legal documents. I held a heavy gold fountain pen in my hand, my fingers slightly trembling as I signed my name on the final line of the last page. My great-aunt had lived a very isolated life. The rest of the family had largely ignored her, finding her difficult and demanding. I was the only one who had bothered to visit her during her final years in an assisted living facility. I did not do it for money. I did it because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked. I never expected anything in return. When I received the call from Harrison Cole, stating that I was the sole beneficiary of her estate, I assumed it might be a few $1,000s, or perhaps some antique furniture. I was entirely unprepared for the reality. My great-aunt had quietly amassed a massive fortune through decades of frugal living and incredibly sharp stock market investments. The final documents I had just signed legally transferred exactly $20 million in liquid assets into my name. $20 million. The number echoed in my head, feeling too enormous to fully comprehend. For the past 6 years, my entire life with Gavin had been defined by financial anxiety. Gavin worked in tech sales, an industry that demanded a certain lifestyle and constant networking. He was always pushing us to live slightly beyond our means, arguing that he needed to project success to achieve it. I worked 60-hour weeks analyzing supply chain data just to keep us afloat, while he went to expensive dinners and country club outings with potential clients. We fought about money constantly. The stress had been wearing us down, hollowing out the foundation of our marriage. But as I set the fountain pen down on Harrison's mahogany desk, all of that weight evaporated. I felt a physical lightness spread through my chest. The late nights, the arguments over grocery bills, the constant underlying panic about the future, it was all over. We were free. I could pay off our mortgage tomorrow. I could finally quit my high-pressure job and breathe. Gavin would never have to worry about impressing his wealthy investors again. I imagined the look on his face when I told him. I pictured his shock giving way to absolute joy. I could not wait to hear his voice. A wide smile broke across my face as I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I unlocked the screen, navigating straight to Gavin's contact profile. I was practically buzzing with adrenaline. Before my thumb could press the call button, Harrison Cole reached across the wide desk. His movement was slow and deliberate. He gently placed his hand over mine, stopping me from making the call. The smile on my face faltered as I looked up at him. I expected to see a shared look of celebration, the polite, congratulatory smile of a professional who had just changed a client's life. Instead, his expression was incredibly grim. The lines around his mouth were deep, and his eyes held a mixture of professional caution and genuine pity. The air in the room suddenly felt very cold. The gentle tapping of the rain against the glass seemed to amplify in the silence. "Before you make any phone calls, Rebecca, we need to discuss a very serious matter," Harrison said softly. He pulled his hand back and reached for a thick manila folder sitting on the corner of his desk. It was the only folder we had not yet opened during our long meeting. I felt a sudden irrational spike of fear. For a fleeting second, I wondered if there was a problem with the inheritance. Perhaps a distant relative was contesting the will, or perhaps there were massive tax liabilities I could not afford to pay. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is there a problem with the transfer of the funds?" "The funds are perfectly secure," Harrison assured me, sliding the manila folder across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of me. "The money has already cleared the necessary holding accounts and is legally yours. However, the issue is not with your great-aunt's estate. The issue is with your marital status." I stared at him in complete confusion. "My marital status? I am married. Gavin and I just celebrated our 6th anniversary last month." "Well, we did not really celebrate because he was away on a business trip, but we are definitely married." Harrison sighed heavily, folding his hands together on the desk. "Rebecca, part of my fiduciary duty as the executor of this estate involves setting up an independent trust for your new assets. To do this properly and ensure your wealth is protected from outside liabilities, my firm conducts a mandatory background and asset check. It is a standard procedure for inheritances of this magnitude. We need to verify current debts, pending litigations, and legal marital status to structure the trust correctly." He gestured toward the closed manila folder. I opened the folder, my fingers numb. Inside was a stack of legal documents, printed on thick, state-issued paper. The seal of the county court was stamped on the top corner of the first page. "When my team pulled the state records to verify your status, we found something deeply concerning," Harrison continued, his voice steady but gentle. "According to the official court records, your husband filed a petition for dissolution of marriage 9 months ago." I stared at the words on the page, but they refused to make sense. The letters seemed to swim before my eyes. 9 months ago. That was impossible. Gavin and I had spent the last 9 months living in the same house. We had eaten dinner together. We had attended his company holiday party together. We had slept in the same bed. This had to be a clerical error, a massive, horrific mistake made by some court employee. "This is wrong," I stammered, shaking my head and pushing the folder back toward him. "There is a mistake. Gavin has never said a word about divorce. We have our problems, but we are living together right now. You need to check the records again." Harrison did not touch the folder. He looked at me with profound sympathy. "I assure you, Rebecca, my team triple-checked the filings before you arrived today. We pulled the certified copies directly from the county clerk. I need you to look at the second page." My hands trembled so violently that I could barely turn the page. The document beneath the cover sheet was titled Judgment of Dissolution. I scanned the dense legal text, my breath catching in my throat. There, in stark black ink, was my name and Gavin's name. The document stated that a default judgment had been entered. "I am so sorry to be the one to tell you this," Harrison said quietly. "The court granted a default judgment because, according to the filings, you failed to respond to the summons within the required legal timeframe. The records show your divorce was legally finalized exactly 2 months ago." I sat frozen in the plush leather chair. The sound of the rain faded away completely. My husband, the man I had supported and loved and worked myself to the bone for, had secretly divorced me while still living in our home. He had smiled in my face, eaten the meals I cooked, and allowed me to pay the household bills, while actively, legally erasing me from his life. And then, the second wave of realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Gavin had orchestrated this secret divorce to toss me aside, likely to protect his new promotion and stock options from being divided in a split. He had timed it perfectly to leave me with absolutely nothing. But his perfect timing had a fatal flaw. Because the divorce was finalized 2 months ago, Gavin had absolutely zero legal claim to the $20 million inheritance that had cleared into my name today. I looked down at my phone, still resting on the desk, waiting to make that joyful call. I picked it up and slowly powered it down. I looked back up at Harrison Cole. The shock was receding, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. How fast can we set up a shadow corporation? Harrison leaned back in his leather chair. He did not immediately answer my question. Instead, he watched me carefully. He was perhaps expecting the tears and hysteria that usually accompanied this kind of devastating news. But there were no tears left in me. As I sat there in the quiet office, the pieces of Gavin's elaborate puzzle finally snapped together with sickening precision. My mind raced backward, tearing through the memories of the past 9 months, stripping away the lies to reveal the ugly, calculated truth beneath the surface of my marriage. I reached for the manila folder again. I pulled the thick stack of legal papers toward me and flipped past the judgment page. I found the receipt of service. It was the document proving I had been officially served with divorce papers. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name, but the loops and angles were entirely wrong. It was a sloppy, rushed imitation of my handwriting. Next to it was a vibrant blue notary stamp, officially verifying that I had supposedly signed this document in person. I traced my finger over the forged ink. The memory of a rainy Tuesday evening last November hit me with crystal clarity. I had been incredibly sick with a severe strain of the flu. I was running a high fever and barely able to keep my eyes open. I had spent 3 days confined to our guest bedroom to avoid getting Gavin sick. He had come into the room wearing a surgical mask. He was carrying a thick stack of papers and a cup of tea. He told me our mortgage broker needed urgent signatures for the house refinancing we had been discussing for months. He said if we did not lock in the rate that night, our monthly payments would skyrocket. My head had been pounding so hard I could not read the fine print. I had blindly trusted my husband. I had signed exactly where he pointed, groggy and shivering, desperate to just go back to sleep. He slipped the default divorce waiver and the quitclaim deed to our house right into that stack of refinancing paperwork. I spoke the words aloud. My voice echoed in the large office. The realization tasted like ash in my mouth. He had me sign away my marriage and my home while I was too medicated to focus on the pages. Harrison nodded slowly. His expression darkened with professional outrage. That matches the timeline of these filings. A fraudulent signature combined with a forged or bribed notary stamp would allow him to push the default judgment through the courts without your knowledge. He bypassed the entire legal notification process. I closed my eyes and pieced together the rest of his deception. It explained so much. It explained why the mail key had mysteriously gone missing from my keychain shortly after that week. That forced me to rely on him to bring the mail in every day. He had been intercepting every court notice, every legal letter, every red flag that could have warned me I was being legally erased. He had systematically isolated my access to our shared administrative life. He volunteered to handle the taxes and the filing of our legal documents, claiming he wanted to take some stress off my shoulders. I had thanked him for being so considerate. The betrayal ran so deep it felt physical, like a heavy weight pressing against my chest. And the timing was not a coincidence. I opened my eyes and looked at the date the initial petition was filed. Gavin had received a massive promotion 9 months ago. He secured a lucrative position as a regional sales director for his technology firm. That promotion came with a significant bump in salary and a massive package of vested stock options. He had orchestrated this entire secret divorce to toss me aside while protecting his newly acquired wealth. He wanted to make sure I could not touch a single cent of his precious stock options in a standard divorce split. He had planned to leave me with absolutely nothing, walking away scot-free to enjoy his new money and his new life. But his greed and his meticulous timing had just backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. Because the court had finalized this fraudulent divorce exactly 2 months ago, Gavin and I were no longer legally married. We were complete strangers in the eyes of the law. And because we were legal strangers, Gavin had absolutely zero claim to the $20 million that had just cleared into my personal accounts today. By rushing to protect his own wealth and lock me out of his success, he had completely locked himself out of a fortune he could never have fathomed. Harrison cleared his throat. He pulled my attention back to the present moment. The irony of the timeline is profound, Rebecca. If he had waited, or if the court had been delayed, this inheritance would be classified as an asset acquired during the marriage. It would have complicated things immensely. But as it stands, this money is yours, and yours alone. He has no legal right to a single penny. I know, I replied. My voice was steady and cold. That is why I asked about the Shadow Corporation. I need to know how quickly we can move this money into untraceable assets. He thinks he has left me penniless. He thinks he holds all the power and that I am just a disposable stepping stone on his path to success. I want him to continue believing that until the exact moment I take everything from him. Harrison leaned forward. He rested his forearms on the mahogany desk. The professional caution in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a sharp and calculating respect. We can establish an anonymous limited liability company within 24 hours. We can route the funds through a blind trust where your name will not appear on any public registry. You will have complete and unchecked control over the capital. But to the outside world, the entity will be completely faceless. Do it, I instructed. I want the finest forensic accountants and private investigators your firm works with on retainer by tomorrow morning. I want to know exactly where Gavin is putting his money. I want to know who he is talking to and what he is planning to do with his new promotion. If he went to the trouble of forging a notary stamp to steal my house, he is hiding other things. I will make the calls immediately, Harrison said. He reached for a fresh notepad. What is your immediate plan regarding your living situation? If he has secured a quitclaim deed, he technically owns the property you are currently living in. He could attempt to force a sudden eviction. Let him try, I said. I felt a dangerous and quiet calm settle over my entire body. The woman who walked into this office an hour ago was gone. That exhausted and anxious wife trying to keep her marriage afloat had died the moment I saw that forged signature. In her place was someone with $20 million and nothing left to lose. I gathered my purse, thanked him for his brilliant guidance, and stood up from the heavy leather chair. I am going home to play the part of the clueless, devoted wife. It is time to go to war. The drive from downtown Seattle back to the suburbs usually took 40 minutes in the afternoon traffic. Today, the commute felt like moving through a vacuum. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my aging sedan. My mind was sharp and intensely focused. I spent the entire drive rehearsing my performance. I planned to walk through the front door, greet my husband with a tired smile, and ask him how his day went. I would cook dinner. I would listen to him complain about his colleagues. I would play the role of the oblivious and supportive wife perfectly. I needed him to feel secure in his deception, while Harrison and his team of corporate investigators built the legal trap we had just discussed. The rain had stopped by the time I turned onto our familiar tree-lined street. The neighborhood was quiet and picture-perfect. Lawns were neatly manicured, and luxury SUVs sat in wide driveways. Our house was at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was a charming four-bedroom property we had purchased 3 years ago. I had spent countless weekends painting those walls and planting the hydrangeas near the porch. I had paid the majority of the down payment from my own hard-earned savings. I thought it was our forever home. As I rounded the final corner, my carefully rehearsed plan evaporated into thin air. The illusion of a quiet homecoming shattered before I even put the car in park. There was an unfamiliar, pristine white sports car parked right in the middle of my designated spot in the driveway. The trunk was popped open. Surrounding the shiny new vehicle was a chaotic and massive pile of heavy-duty black trash bags. They were stuffed full and haphazardly dumped onto the wet concrete. For a brief and confusing second, I genuinely thought we had been robbed. But then, the front door of my house swung wide open. Gavin walked out. He was not wearing his usual tailored business suit. He was dressed in casual designer clothes I had never seen before. He was carrying a large cardboard box overflowing with my professional blazers, my favorite sweaters, and framed photographs from my desk. Right behind him was a young woman I had never seen before. She looked to be about 24 years old. She had long, glossy blonde hair and a perfectly applied face of makeup. She was wearing expensive athletic wear and carrying an armful of my shoes, holding them carelessly by the heels. They were laughing together. The sound of Gavin laughing with a strange woman while literally carrying my personal belongings out of my home hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The plan to quietly play the clueless wife was instantly irrelevant. Gavin had already decided to detonate our life today. I turned off the engine and stepped out of my car. The gravel crunched loudly beneath my shoes as I walked up the driveway. Gavin froze when he saw me. The relaxed and joyful expression on his handsome face vanished completely. He carelessly dropped the cardboard box onto the concrete. My neatly folded blouses spilled out into the muddy puddles left by the morning rain. He did not look guilty or caught off guard. Instead, his features hardened into a mask of cold arrogance. The loving husband facade he had worn just yesterday was gone without a trace. He looked at me with absolute disdain. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. His voice was sharp and aggressive. "You are supposed to be at the office crunching numbers until 6 o'clock. I stared at the trash bags scattered across my driveway. I recognized the corner of my grandmother's favorite quilt sticking out of one torn bag. "What is going on?" I asked. My voice trembled just enough to sound genuinely terrified. "Who is she, and why are my clothes sitting in the driveway?" Gavin crossed his arms over his chest. He took an intimidating step forward, physically blocking my path to the front door. "This is my house, Rebecca. I am clearing out the garbage. You are legally a trespasser here. I suggest you take your pathetic bags and leave before things get ugly." A trespasser. I repeated the word slowly. I let pure shock wash over my face, giving him exactly the reaction he craved. Gavin sneered at me. "Do not play dumb with me. You know the court finalized the default divorce 2 months ago. The house is solely in my name now. I am completely done carrying your dead weight. You have been dragging my personal brand down for years. I am stepping into a massive new executive role. I am launching a new startup division next quarter with serious backing from major investors. I cannot have a boring, exhausted data analyst weighing down my trajectory. You sit in a dreary cubicle analyzing shipping logistics all day. It is a dead-end joke of a career. I am building a legitimate empire, and you simply do not fit the aesthetic of a successful corporate founder." I stared at the man I had financially supported through years of incredible stress. I had worked grueling 60-hour weeks to pay for the advanced degree that got him his current job. I had sacrificed my own career advancement to make sure his resume looked flawless to investors. And now he was standing on the property he stole from me, calling my reliable career a joke. He was looking at me like I was a temporary parasite he had finally managed to scrape off his expensive shoe. The young woman stepped forward. She dropped my shoes onto the wet concrete without a single second thought. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure pity and vicious amusement. "So you are the infamous Rebecca," she said. Her voice was unpleasantly sweet and dripping with condescension. "Gavin has told me so much about you. I am Caitlin." She reached into one of the open trash bags and pulled out my heavy winter coat. It was a practical, inexpensive coat I had bought on sale 4 years ago because we were aggressively saving money for our mortgage payments. Caitlin held it up with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated with a disease. She let out a bright, mocking laugh. "You really need to upgrade your aesthetic, Rebecca. This is just absolutely tragic. Now that you are entering the dating pool again, you might want to try actually trying. No successful man wants a woman who dresses like she has completely given up on life. We have already ordered all new custom furniture for the master bedroom. Your drab style was depressing him." Gavin chuckled and wrapped his arms securely around Caitlin. His hand rested comfortably on her waist. "She is entirely right," he added. "You let yourself go a long time ago. Take your cheap clothes and get off my property. I want you gone in exactly 30 minutes. If you are not gone by then, I am calling the local police and having you formally arrested for trespassing. This is your only warning. Do not make a scene and embarrass yourself any further." He turned his back on me and walked Caitlin toward the front door, leaving me standing alone among the black garbage bags containing the remnants of my former life. The cold rain began to fall again as I stared at the closed door. The icy drops soaked through my thin blouse. I stood frozen on the driveway, surrounded by black plastic bags holding everything I owned. Across the manicured lawns of the cul-de-sac, front doors cracked open. The commotion drew the attention of the neighbors. Mrs. Gable, the widow next door, stepped onto her porch, pulling her cardigan tight. Mr. Henderson paused in his driveway, his eyes glued to my humiliation. Their stares pressed against my neck. The heavy front door swung open again. Gavin stepped back out onto the covered porch. He did not look angry anymore. He looked entirely composed, executing a carefully rehearsed public relations strategy for the growing audience of neighbors. He raised his voice, ensuring the sound echoed down the quiet street. "Rebecca, you need to accept reality," he called out. His tone was laced with exaggerated theatrical patience, like he was reasoning with an unruly toddler. "I have told you for months this was coming. You cannot ignore court summons and pretend the divorce is not happening. You have been completely delusional about our legal situation. I gave you every opportunity to handle this quietly." I stared at his fingernails digging into my palms. He was actively rewriting our history for the spectators, painting me as the unstable, denial-ridden ex-wife who drove him to this public eviction. He stopped at the edge of the driveway, keeping a safe distance. "I am trying to be reasonable," Gavin continued loudly. "But Caitlin and I need to start our new life without your harassment. I am giving you exactly 30 minutes to load your trash bags and get off my property. If you are not gone by 3:30, I am calling the police to have you removed for trespassing. I will not hesitate to get a restraining order." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my analytical mind began to boot up. I spent my life looking at raw numbers and finding the most efficient path to a desired outcome. The data told me something crucial. Gavin was deeply insecure, entirely driven by ego, and desperate to prove to Caitlin and the neighbors that he was in charge. If I fought him here, he would become suspicious and double-check his legal standing. I needed him completely off guard. I needed him to believe he had won. I needed him to feel so invincible that he would never see the total ruin heading straight toward him until it was already too late to escape. I swallowed my pride. I let my shoulders slump forward, physically deflating under the freezing rain. I allowed my breathing to turn ragged. I summoned every ounce of genuine terror I had felt in Harrison Cole's office and channeled it into my eyes. Tears welled up and spilled over my cheeks, mixing with the rain. "Please, Gavin," I choked out, letting my voice crack with authentic-sounding despair. I took a hesitant step toward him. "Where am I supposed to go? I do not have anywhere to live. All my savings went into the down payment for this house. You know I cannot afford a new apartment. Please let me come inside and talk about this." Gavin stood taller, his chest puffed out as he drank in my humiliation. Behind him, Caitlin appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame to watch me beg. Gavin shook his head with a slow, patronizing sigh. "That is exactly the kind of pathetic dependence that ruined our marriage," he said coldly. "You always expect me to solve your problems. It is not my fault you are financially illiterate. You have 28 minutes left. Start lifting." I dropped my head, burying my face in my hands, to let out a loud, shuddering sob. Then I turned and walked toward the first heavy black garbage bag. I grabbed the plastic knot and dragged it across the concrete. It was filled with my winter boots and heavy sweaters. The plastic scraped loudly against the driveway. I opened the trunk of my aging sedan and heaved the bag inside. I walked back to the pile, my wet hair plastered to my face, my slacks soaked through. I dragged the bags one by one, playing the part of the utterly broken woman. I stumbled slightly, letting my breath hitch loudly. He stood on the porch with Caitlin the entire time, watching me labor in the rain, with a smug smirk. It took me 22 agonizing minutes to shove all 30 trash bags into my car. My vehicle was packed to the roof with wrinkled clothes and loose books. I slammed the trunk shut and my hands covered in mud. I did not look back at the house or his new mistress. I simply slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered before roaring to life. I put the car in reverse and slowly backed out of the driveway. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw Gavin and Caitlin walking back inside, their arms wrapped around each other, completely unbothered by the life they had just destroyed. I drove away from the suburbs. The further I got from that house, the lighter I felt. The tears stopped immediately. I wiped the wet streaks from my face, my posture straightened behind the wheel. The pathetic, sobbing ex-wife vanished completely, replaced by the woman who possessed $20 million and a flawless strategy for annihilation. I took a deep breath, letting the stale air of the car fill my lungs, and realized I was no longer suffocating under the weight of Gavin's constant demands and manipulations. I merged onto the highway toward downtown Seattle. The gray sky transitioned into early evening twilight. I bypassed my usual modest haunts and drove straight into the luxury commercial district. I pulled my cramped, garbage-filled sedan into the valet circle of the most exclusive five-star hotel in the city. Handing the surprised valet a crisp $100 bill, I told him to keep the car parked out of sight. I walked into the grand, marble-floored lobby, ignoring the strange looks from wealthy patrons. I approached the front desk, handed the concierge my newly issued premium credit card, connected to my trust accounts, and booked the top-floor penthouse suite for the next month. 2 hours later, I had taken a scalding hot shower, washing away the mud and the freezing rain. I was wearing a plush, heavy cotton robe. The penthouse suite was magnificent, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Seattle skyline and the dark waters of Puget Sound. I sat in a massive, butter-soft leather armchair overlooking the glittering city. A bottle of vintage wine sat on the glass coffee table beside me. The room service attendant had uncorked the $200 bottle with practiced elegance. I held the crystal wine glass in my right hand, feeling the smooth, expensive stem between my fingers. My cell phone buzzed on the armrest. The screen illuminated the dim room. It was a text message from Gavin. I picked up the phone and read the words he had typed out, likely while sitting on the sofa I had paid for. Do not try to fight this. You cannot afford a lawyer. You have nothing. Just disappear quietly and move on with your sad life. I stared at the glowing text message for a long moment, feeling absolutely no anger, only a profound sense of anticipation. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark red wine. It tasted incredibly rich, complex, and absolutely perfect. I looked out at the towering skyscrapers lighting up the dark night, knowing with certainty that by tomorrow morning, I would own a massive piece of this city. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face as I turned the phone off, tossed it onto the glass table, and let the beautiful silence of the penthouse settle around me. The morning sun broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, casting a warm, golden glow across the imported rugs. I woke up feeling completely rested for the first time in months. There was no anxiety tightening my chest. There was no dread about checking our dwindling bank account balances. I ordered a lavish room service breakfast and took my time getting ready for work. I carefully selected a crisp navy blazer and slacks from the few professional items that had survived the muddy driveway eviction. I applied my makeup with meticulous precision. Today was Monday, and I was scheduled to lead a major supply chain audit for our largest client. I planned to go into the office and do my job perfectly and quietly coordinate with Harris and Cole during my lunch break. I felt untouchable as I rode the elevator down to the grand lobby. The drive to the logistics firm was uneventful. I parked my car in the employee lot and walked through the glass doors of the corporate building. I took a deep breath, ready to dive into the data. I swiped my badge and stepped onto the third floor. I had barely set my purse down on my desk when the phone rang. It was the receptionist for the Human Resources Department. She asked me to come to the main conference room immediately. A strange prickle of unease ran down my spine. I left my computer asleep and walked down the long corridor. When I opened the heavy glass door of the conference room, I found my direct supervisor, Mr. Caldwell, sitting at the long table. He was a perpetually nervous man who avoided conflict at all costs. Sitting next to him was Diane from Human Resources. Neither of them smiled when I walked in. They both looked incredibly uncomfortable. "Please have a seat," Rebecca Diane said softly. She gestured to the empty chair across from them. I sat down, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression neutral. "We received a highly concerning phone call this morning," Mr. Caldwell began. He refused to make eye contact with me, opting instead to stare at the blank notepad in front of him. "Your husband contacted our department directly, just before 8 o'clock. My ex-husband," I corrected automatically. My voice was calm, but my mind was spinning. Gavin had called my boss. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. "Right," Diane interjected. She folded her hands on the table. "He informed us about the divorce. However, he called because he felt a moral obligation to warn the company about your current mental state. He stated that you are undergoing a severe psychiatric break due to the separation. He claimed you showed up at his property yesterday and became violently unstable. He also stated that you have been making credible threats against him and his new partner." I sat perfectly still. The air in the room felt thick. Gavin was not just satisfied with stealing my home and my assets. He wanted to ensure I had absolutely no foundation left to stand on. He knew that my job was my only source of income. He knew I was relying on this paycheck to survive what he thought was an impending legal battle. By calling my employer and branding me as an unstable threat, he was actively trying to destroy my professional reputation. "He warned us that you might be a liability in the workplace," Mr. Caldwell added, finally looking up. "He said you have been struggling with reality and might act out impulsively. We have to take these kinds of warnings very seriously, Rebecca. We have a corporate duty to maintain a safe environment for all our employees. A bitter realization washed over me. I stared at the two people across the table. I had spent the last 6 years propping Gavin up so he could sound exactly like this. I had worked grueling 60-hour weeks analyzing freight data so we could afford the exorbitant tuition for his Master of Business Administration degree. I had stayed up until 2 in the morning formatting his spreadsheets and writing his final thesis papers because he was too busy networking at the local country club. I had given him the vocabulary, the polish, and the corporate confidence he was now using to systematically dismantle my life. He was leveraging the exact same executive charm I had paid for to convince my spineless manager that I was insane. "I have worked here for 5 years, Mr. Caldwell," I said. My voice was remarkably steady. "I have never missed a single deadline. I have never acted unprofessionally. I brought in the quarterly audit ahead of schedule just last week. You know me. You know my strong work ethic. Are you truly going to take the word of an estranged ex-husband over my proven track record?" Mr. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "It is not about taking sides, Rebecca. It is about mitigating risk. We simply cannot have workplace drama bleeding into our daily operations, especially not during the busy fourth quarter audits. The optics are terrible. If something were to happen, the liability would fall on management." "So what are you saying to me?" I asked. Diane slid a single sheet of printed paper across the polished table. "We believe it is in everyone's best interest if you take some time away to focus on your personal life and seek the help you might need. We are placing you on unpaid administrative leave effective immediately. This is pending a formal review of the entire situation. We will need your key card before you leave the building today." They were suspending me without pay based entirely on a malicious phone call. A week ago, this would have destroyed me. A week ago, I would have panicked, begged for my job, and cried about how I was going to pay for groceries. But today, I had $20 million sitting in a blind trust. I did not need this job. I did not need Mr. Caldwell's approval. I looked at the paper. I did not bother to read the words. I simply stood up from the chair. "I will gather my things," I said coldly. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice to argue. I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving them both sitting in stunned silence. I walked back to my desk and pulled a small cardboard box from the supply closet. I began packing my few personal items. My hands moved mechanically. I felt a strange sense of detachment from the office around me. As I placed my favorite coffee mug into the box, my cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a missed call from an unsaved number. A new voicemail notification popped up on the screen. I tapped the icon and held the phone to my ear. The shrill, aristocratic voice of Gavin's mother, Patricia, filled my ear. "Rebecca, it is Patricia." The voicemail began without any pleasantries. "Gavin told me about the embarrassing spectacle you caused at his house yesterday afternoon. I am calling to tell you to leave my son alone. You need to accept that this marriage failed because of your own personal shortcomings. You are a barren failure who prioritized a mediocre job over giving my son the family he deserved. You drove him into the arms of a woman who actually understands how to support a successful man. Caitlin comes from a respectable family. She knows how to elevate him. You only ever held him back. Do not call him again. Do not contact us. Have some dignity and disappear completely." The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I lowered the phone slowly. Patricia had always hated me. She came from minor generational wealth and always viewed my working-class background as a permanent stain on her family tree. She had constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my inability to have children, completely ignoring the fact that Gavin and I had mutually agreed to delay starting a family until his student loans were fully paid off. Now she was blaming me for his infidelity and praising his mistress simply because her father had money. I deleted the message immediately. I did not feel hurt by her vicious words. I only felt an intense, burning clarity. They all believed I was utterly broken. They all believed I was powerless and defeated. I picked up the cardboard box, handed my keycard to the stunned receptionist, and walked out of the building into the crisp morning air. The wind whipped past my face as I walked directly to my car, placed the box in the passenger seat, and took a deep, steadying breath. I pulled out my phone and dialed Harrison Cole's direct line, ready to begin the next phase. The time for waiting was completely over. Harrison answered on the second ring. His voice was a steady anchor against the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I informed him that my schedule had just completely opened up, and we needed to accelerate our timeline. He did not ask unnecessary questions. He simply gave me an address for a private annex building his firm utilized for highly sensitive client matters, and told me to be there in exactly 30 minutes. I drove across the city with a profound sense of purpose. The logistics firm I had poured 5 years of my life into was already fading from my mind. The endless spreadsheets, the ungrateful managers, and the suffocating corporate culture no longer mattered. I was walking away from a life of quiet desperation and stepping into a realm of limitless possibilities, fueled by a fortune that Gavin could never touch. I knew exactly what kind of chaos I had left behind. Without my meticulous oversight, the upcoming fourth quarter audit was going to be an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Mr. Caldwell would be forced to stand before the executive board and explain why their lead analyst had vanished during the most critical financial period of the entire fiscal year. I allowed myself a brief, satisfying smile at the thought before putting the company out of my head entirely. I had a much larger and more important enterprise to manage now. The annex building was a sleek structure of dark glass and steel. I took the private elevator up to the top floor and was escorted into a windowless, soundproof conference room. Harrison was already waiting at the large polished table. He was not alone. Sitting across from him were a man and a woman dressed in sharp, unassuming business attire. Rebecca Harrison said as I took my seat. "We have been moving quickly. The initial paperwork for the limited liability company is ready for your final signature. The routing accounts have been verified and the firewall protections are firmly in place. From this moment forward, you will operate financially under the name Apex Vanguard Holdings." He slid a heavy stack of documents toward me. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the designated lines, legally binding my $20 million to a completely faceless corporate entity. There would be no public record tying my identity to Apex Vanguard Holdings. I was invisible, and therefore I was incredibly dangerous. "Let me introduce you to your new team," Harrison continued, gesturing to the two professionals across the table. "This is David, our lead private investigator, and Simone, a senior forensic accountant. They specialize in high-wealth asset tracking and corporate espionage defense. I briefed them on your ex-husband's situation this morning." David offered a slight, respectful nod. He opened a thick leather binder on the table. "We have spent the last few hours pulling every available piece of data on Gavin and his recent professional movements. You were correct to suspect that he was hiding significant developments. His recent promotion to regional sales director was just a stepping stone. He is actually using that title to leverage a massive spin-off venture. He is launching his own independent tech sales firm next quarter." I leaned forward, absorbing the information. Gavin had always talked about being his own boss, but he never had the capital or the risk tolerance to actually do it. He always relied on my steady paycheck to cushion his lavish lifestyle. "How is he funding a completely new firm?" I asked. "He does not have the liquid assets for a venture of that massive magnitude." "That brings us to his new partner," Simone interjected. She slid a printed photograph across the table. It was a picture of a distinguished-looking man in his late 60s, wearing an expensive tailored suit and standing on a prestigious golf course. This is Richard Montgomery. He is Caitlin's father. I stared at the photograph. The pieces of Gavin's sudden boldness were falling into place. Richard Montgomery is a prominent figure in Seattle's upper crust, Simone explained. He comes from old money and sits on the boards of several major investment groups. He is incredibly wealthy, but more importantly, he is completely obsessed with social status and family legacy. Our initial deep dive shows that Richard is the sole angel investor backing Gavin's new tech firm. He is fronting the initial capital to ensure his daughter marries a man who appears to be a highly successful corporate founder. He wants a son-in-law he can brag about at his country club. David tapped the open folder. Gavin is moving at a breakneck speed to solidify this image. He is hosting a massive high society launch party for the new firm in exactly 4 weeks. The guest list is entirely made up of Richard Montgomery's elite circle of friends and potential corporate investors. Gavin needs this party to go perfectly to secure secondary funding. If he fails to impress Richard's network, the entire venture collapses before it even begins. I leaned back in my chair, processing the massive vulnerability in Gavin's aggressive expansion. He had traded my financial stability for Caitlin's family wealth, but that new wealth came with immense crushing pressure to perform. Gavin was dancing on a razor-thin wire, trying to prove he was a heavy-hitting executive to a man who would drop him the second he looked like a liability. There is one major hurdle Gavin is currently facing, David continued. He pulled up a digital map on a tablet and turned the screen toward me. You cannot invite the city's most elite investors to a launch party if your company does not have a physical home. Gavin is desperately hunting for premium commercial real estate in the downtown district. He needs a flagship office to serve as the physical proof of his newfound success. Simone nodded in agreement. He has been touring high-end commercial skyscrapers all week. He needs a lease signed and the keys in hand immediately so he can put the prestigious address on the formal invitations for the launch party. He is highly motivated and under extreme pressure from Richard to lock down a location that screams absolute wealth. I looked at the digital map. Red markers dotted the downtown commercial sector, indicating the buildings Gavin had recently toured. A quiet thrill sparked in my chest. Gavin was frantic, trying to build an illusion of grandeur on a foundation of lies and borrowed money. He needed a landlord to approve him for a massive commercial space, and he needed it yesterday. Harrison watched me carefully. You have $20 million in liquid capital sitting in Apex Vanguard Holdings, Rebecca. What is your directive? I looked away from the map and met the attorney's gaze. Gavin wants to play the part of the untouchable corporate titan, I said softly. He wants a premium office to show his new father-in-law that he is a powerful man. I want David to monitor every single commercial real estate broker Gavin contacts. The second Gavin selects a building and applies for a commercial lease, I want to know about it. And then what? Simone asked, her eyes narrowing with professional curiosity. I smiled, feeling the absolute power of the assets backing my name. Then, Apex Vanguard Holdings is going to step in and buy the entire building in cash. I want to be his landlord. I want to own the very floor he walks on. I want to control the air conditioning, the parking spaces, and the maintenance clauses. We are going to let him sign an ironclad, incredibly expensive commercial lease. We will let him send out his fancy invitations to Richard Montgomery's wealthy friends. And then, we are going to start tightening the screws. David let out a low whistle of appreciation. That is a ruthless strategy. If he violates the lease or fails to pay, you could evict him right as he tries to launch his new enterprise. I am not just going to evict him, I corrected smoothly. I am going to let him build his entire house of cards on my property. I am going to watch him smile and brag and pretend he is a king. And when he is standing in front of everyone he desperately needs to impress, I am going to pull the floor completely out from under him. Harrison closed his notepad with a decisive snap. "We will monitor his real estate tours around the clock. You will have the name of his chosen building the moment he submits an application." I stood up from the conference table, feeling an electric surge of anticipation. Gavin thought he had left me with trash bags in the freezing rain. He had no idea he had just handed me the absolute keys to his complete and total destruction. "Let him hunt for his perfect office," I said, gathering my coat. "I have a lot of money to spend, and I am in the market for some premium real estate." The next 72 hours were a masterclass in patience. I traded my cramped cubicle for the sprawling living area of my penthouse suite. Instead of analyzing shipping routes for ungrateful managers, I analyzed my ex-husband. David and Simone established a secure communication channel, sending me encrypted updates every few hours. They had tapped into the commercial real estate networks of downtown Seattle with frightening efficiency. Gavin was moving exactly as we had predicted. He was frantic touring properties well above his actual budget, driven entirely by the need to impress Richard Montgomery. On Thursday afternoon, David sent a priority alert. Gavin had found his prize. It was a massive suite on the 42nd floor of the Cascade Tower. The building was an architectural marvel of glass and steel right in the heart of the financial district. It was the kind of address that signaled instant credibility to any investor walking through the brass revolving doors. The rent was astronomical. The building management required massive security deposits and strictly enforced covenants regarding renovations and tenant behavior. It was designed to keep out volatile startups that might default, but Gavin was desperate. He used a massive chunk of Richard Montgomery's initial seed money to secure the deposit. Simone forwarded me a copy of the lease agreement that Gavin had proudly signed that very morning. I read through the dense legal text while sitting on my velvet sofa. He had locked himself into a 5-year, ironclad agreement. The monthly payments were staggering, but the penalty clauses for default or unapproved alterations were absolutely draconian. Gavin was so blinded by the panoramic views and the prestigious zip code that he had happily signed away his flexibility. He believed the rules would not apply to him once he was a tenant. He was accustomed to charming his way out of trouble. With the lease secured, Gavin felt untouchable. He had his wealthy backing, his trophy mistress, and now a flagship office that screamed success. It was time for him to solidify his public narrative. He needed to make sure everyone in our social circle knew exactly who the winner was in our sudden divorce. Friday evening, I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and opened my social media accounts. My feed refreshed, and there it was. Gavin had posted a professional, highly stylized photograph. He and Caitlin were standing on the deck of a yacht, the Seattle skyline glowing brightly behind them. Caitlin was wearing a stunning, obviously expensive evening gown. She was holding up her left hand to display a massive diamond ring that caught the light perfectly. Gavin looked incredibly handsome, wearing a tailored tuxedo and a smile that reeked of supreme satisfaction. The caption was long and meticulously crafted. He wrote about new beginnings and finding true partnership. He thanked Richard Montgomery for believing in his vision. But the second paragraph was designed specifically to destroy me. He wrote about the difficulty of escaping a toxic, unsupportive past. He claimed he had spent years being held back by someone who refused to grow, someone who drained his energy and tried to sabotage his ambitions out of pure jealousy. He painted himself as a resilient survivor who had finally broken free from a suffocating and unstable environment. He never used my actual name, but he did not need to. The reaction was immediate and brutal. My phone began to buzz with notifications. I watched in real time as people I had considered friends for years began to react to his post. These were couples we had hosted for dinner parties in our suburban home. These were women I had comforted through their own struggles, and men Gavin had played golf with on the weekends. They flooded his comment section with congratulations and heart emojis. They told him how happy they were that he had found peace. They praised his incredible strength for leaving such a negative situation. Then the digital purge began. I clicked on the profile of my closest friend in our neighborhood circle. The screen went blank. She had blocked me. I checked another profile, then another. The result was the exact same. Gavin controlled the narrative because he controlled the appearance of wealth and success. He was the rising corporate star with the beautiful new fiancée and the billionaire father-in-law. I was just the discarded, allegedly unstable ex-wife who had lost her job and her home in the same week. They chose the winning team without a single second thought. They did not reach out to ask for my side of the story. They simply erased me from their lives completely. I sat alone in the penthouse, watching my social network completely evaporate. I did not shed a single tear. The betrayal from my former friends barely registered as pain. Instead, it served as a profound relief. I had spent 6 years contorting myself to fit into a social circle that only valued me for my proximity to Gavin's fake charm. Seeing them abandon me so quickly only confirmed that they were never my friends to begin with. Gavin had done me an incredible favor. He had cleared out the dead weight from my life, leaving me perfectly unburdened. Monday morning, I returned to the private annex building to meet with Harrison. The weekend of watching Gavin gloat online had sharpened my focus to a razor edge. I walked into the soundproof conference room and found Harrison reviewing a stack of thick legal binders. He looked up and nodded, recognizing the absolute shift in my demeanor. "He has the lease," I said, taking my seat at the mahogany table. "He is in the Cascade Tower. He signed a 5-year agreement. Now I want to buy the building." Harrison did not flinch at the magnitude of the request. He simply opened the first binder. The Cascade Tower is currently owned by a commercial real estate conglomerate based out of Chicago. They have been quietly looking to liquidate some of their Pacific Northwest assets to free up capital for an expansion in the Midwest. The building is highly profitable, but it is an older structure, requiring significant ongoing maintenance. They are highly motivated sellers if the price is right and the transaction is swift. "I have $20 million in clean, untraceable cash sitting in Apex Vanguard Holdings," I reminded him. "Make them an offer they cannot refuse. I want a completely quiet, off-market transaction, no press releases, no industry announcements. I want to own that building before Gavin even finishes unpacking his new desk." Harrison pulled a specific document from the binder. "We have already conducted a preliminary valuation based on your instructions from last week. The current market value of the Cascade Tower is roughly $13 million. Given their desire for a rapid liquidation and your ability to bypass standard commercial financing, we can secure the property for $14 million in an expedited all-cash closing. The legal transfer of ownership can be finalized in less than 10 days. $14 million was a massive sum of money, but it left me with a substantial operating reserve of $6 million. More importantly, it successfully purchased the ultimate corporate battlefield. He blindly thinks he has already won this war. "Do it," I said, without a single moment of hesitation. "Draft the legal purchase agreement immediately. I am going to build a very quiet, very expensive cage right around him." I watched their digital profiles disappear from my life, but I did not shed a single tear. Let them have the appearance of wealth. Let them bask in the false glow of Gavin's manufactured success. I was securing the reality of it. While my former friends were busy blocking my number and blindly accepting Gavin's carefully constructed public relations campaign, I was sitting in Harrison Cole's secure conference room, finalizing the ultimate counterstrike. The paperwork for the Cascade Tower purchase was stacked neatly in front of me. $14 million in clean, untraceable cash was ready to be wired directly from the accounts of Apex Vanguard Holdings. Harrison slid a heavy gold pen across the mahogany table. "The sellers were highly motivated by the all-cash offer," he said smoothly. They agreed to expedite the closing process to accommodate our aggressive timeline. As of this moment, the title transfer is completely clear. The building is yours. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the final line of the contract. The scratch of the nib against the thick paper sounded incredibly loud in the quiet room. A thrilling surge of power raced through my veins. It was a completely invisible kind of power, masked behind corporate veils and legal firewalls. To the rest of the world, a faceless investment group had simply expanded its commercial real estate portfolio. But the reality was far more dangerous. I was now the sole owner of the prestigious skyscraper where Gavin had just signed his deeply expensive 5-year lease. I was officially my ex-husband's landlord. We need to discuss the property management transition. Harrison continued organizing the signed documents into neat piles. The previous owners utilized a management firm led by a man named Gregory Mitchell. He has a reputation for being a strict by-the-book administrator, but the previous ownership group frequently undermined his authority to keep their high-paying tenants happy. He is frustrated and looking for strong leadership. We can either retain him or replace him. Bring him in, I instructed. I want to meet him today. 2 hours later, Gregory Mitchell sat across from me in the same windowless conference room. He was a stern man in his late 50s, with sharp eyes and a posture that commanded immediate respect. Harrison introduced me simply as the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Vanguard Holdings. I did not offer my full name, and Mitchell was professional enough not to pry. Mr. Mitchell. I began folding my hands on the table. I understand the previous owners were rather lax regarding the enforcement of tenant covenants and building regulations. They allowed certain high-profile renters to bypass the rules. Mitchell let out a heavy sigh, nodding in agreement. They prioritized rent collection over structural integrity. Tenants would begin massive, unapproved renovations without securing the proper city permits or submitting architectural plans to my office. It was a massive liability. That era of leniency is officially over, I stated coldly. As the new owner, my directive to you is absolute, ruthless compliance. You are to enforce every single clause, every fine, and every footnote in the commercial leases. I want 0 grace periods for late payments. I want immediate cease and desist orders issued for any unapproved construction. If a tenant violates the terms of their agreement, you will hit them with the maximum financial penalty allowed by law. Do I make myself perfectly clear? A slow, genuine smile spread across Mitchell's face. Crystal clear, ma'am. I will begin auditing the current tenant activities this afternoon. There is a new tech firm on the 42nd floor that just moved in this week. They have already started knocking down drywall without submitting a single blueprint to my office. The founder slipped the night supervisor a cash bribe to keep the freight elevators open past operating hours. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression entirely neutral. Oh, really? I asked softly. What is the name of the firm? I believe they are calling themselves Montgomery Digital Solutions, Mitchell replied, checking a small notebook from his breast pocket. The founder's name is Gavin. He is an arrogant young man who seems to think the rules do not apply to him because his father-in-law is backing the venture. I leaned back in my leather chair. I want you to hit him with everything you have, Mr. Mitchell. Issue the maximum fines for the unapproved demolition. Halt all his construction immediately until he submits proper permits and charge him for the unauthorized use of the freight elevators. Show him exactly who is in charge of this building. Mitchell nodded enthusiastically. It will be my absolute pleasure. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched the trap snap shut from the luxurious comfort of my penthouse suite. Simone and David, my forensic accounting and private investigation team, monitored the financial fallout in real time. Gavin had wanted an open-concept office layout with imported Italian marble floors and custom frosted glass walls. He needed the space to look like a billion-dollar enterprise to impress Richard Montgomery. He had completely drained his initial operating budget to purchase the expensive materials, assuming his bribes would keep the building management looking the other way. He was wrong. Mitchell struck with devastating efficiency. Gavin's construction crew was locked out of the 42nd floor. Massive financial penalties were levied against his brand new company for structural violations and breach of contract. To resume construction, Gavin was legally required to submit expensive architectural blueprints and wait for city permit approvals, a process that would take weeks he simply did not have. His grand launch party was rapidly approaching, and his prestigious flagship office was currently a half-demolished, unusable disaster zone. The stress began to crush him. David's surveillance reports indicated that Gavin was working 18-hour days, desperately trying to find contractors who could expedite the permit process. He was visibly exhausted, losing weight and snapping at his employees. But the most crucial piece of data was what he was doing with Caitlin. He was completely hiding the crisis from his new fiancée and her wealthy father. He was terrified that Richard Montgomery would view the massive fines as a sign of extreme incompetence. Gavin was bleeding money rapidly, secretly pulling cash from his personal accounts to cover the exorbitant building penalties, while pretending to Caitlin that everything was proceeding perfectly. I was sipping my morning coffee and reading David's latest surveillance report when a knock sounded at my penthouse door. The hotel concierge had brought up my forwarded mail. I thanked him, tipped him generously, and carried the small stack of envelopes to the glass coffee table. Sitting right on top of the pile was a thick, heavy envelope made of premium, cream-colored cardstock. The calligraphy on the front was elegant and perfectly embossed with gold foil. I recognized the return address immediately. It was from Caitlin's family estate. I slid my finger under the gold seal and pulled out a lavish wedding invitation. It formally requested the honor of my presence at the marriage of Caitlin Montgomery and Gavin. The venue was listed as the Lakeside Heritage Club, one of the most exclusive and ridiculously expensive country clubs in the entire state of Washington. The date was set for exactly 3 weeks from now. The sheer audacity of sending an invitation to your new husband's ex-wife was staggering. It was a calculated, vicious move designed entirely to humiliate me. Caitlin wanted to rub her victory in my face. She wanted me to sit in my allegedly cramped, poor apartment and cry over the luxurious life I had lost to a younger, prettier, and wealthier woman. To ensure the message was received loud and clear, Caitlin had included a small, bright yellow sticky note attached to the RSVP card. I peeled it off and read her neat, looping handwriting. "Sorry things did not work out for you. Hope you find a job soon." I stared at the sticky note for a long time. The absolute arrogance of it was breathtaking. She genuinely believed she had won the ultimate prize. She thought she was marrying a highly successful, wealthy tech founder who had finally escaped his burdensome and toxic past. She had absolutely no idea that her perfect fiancé was currently drowning in debt, actively lying to her father, and paying exorbitant fines to the very woman she was trying to mock. I picked up a sleek black pen from the coffee table. I smoothed out the heavy cardstock of the RSVP card. I checked the box that cheerfully accepted the invitation, indicating that I would indeed be attending the grand celebration. I slid the card into the return envelope and sealed it shut. A genuine, radiant smile spread across my face as I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the towering glass structure of the Cascade Tower in the distance. I was going to attend that wedding, and I was going to bring the perfect gift. The next morning, I invited David and Simone to my penthouse. The view was obscured by gray clouds, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. I had a specific target, and my team had worked through the night gathering the intelligence I needed. I poured them coffee as Simone laid a neatly bound dossier on the table. I pointed to the elegant wedding invitation sitting next to it. "The venue is the Lakeside Heritage Club," I said. I want to know everything about it. I want to know who owns the land and what their financial vulnerabilities are. If Gavin is hosting his grand society wedding there, I need to understand the battlefield. Simone took a sip of her coffee and offered an approving smile. She opened the dossier. The Lakeside Heritage Club is one of the most exclusive venues in the state. It caters almost exclusively to generational wealth. The waiting list is over 10 years long. Caitlin's father, Richard Montgomery, is a prominent member of their board of directors. He uses the club to entertain elite investors and host charity galas. It is the epicenter of his social power. But that power is standing on incredibly fragile ground, David added. He pulled out highlighted financial spreadsheets. We did a deep dive into the club's corporate structure. To the public, Lakeside Heritage projects untouchable prestige. Behind closed doors, they are drowning in severe, unmanageable debt. I leaned forward, my interest instantly piqued. How does a club that exclusive end up in financial ruin? I asked. Gross mismanagement and a desperate need to keep up appearances, Simone explained. 5 years ago, the board approved a massive renovation project to update their golf courses and expand the main ballroom. They took out enormous commercial loans, but the project went severely over budget, and membership dues have not kept pace with soaring interest rates. They have been quietly refinancing their debt for 3 years, trying to hide the crisis, but the well has run completely dry. David pointed to a specific line on the spreadsheet. The club owes a consortium of private lenders roughly $5 million, and the balloon payment is due at the end of this month. If they miss that payment, the lenders will force the club into bankruptcy. The board is panicking. If the club goes under, Richard Montgomery will face massive public humiliation. I looked at the numbers on the page. A beautiful, dangerous idea began to form in my mind. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning perfectly. Gavin was renting an office in a building I owned, and now he was planning to marry his mistress at a venue that was teetering on the edge of complete financial collapse. I turned to Harrison, who had just walked into the suite and taken a seat beside Simone. How much liquid capital do we currently have remaining in Apex Vanguard Holdings? I asked. After the $14 million cash purchase of the Cascade Tower, you have roughly $6 million in available liquid assets, Harrison replied. We also have a healthy operating reserve, but $6 million is your immediate deployable cash. I looked back at the elegant wedding invitation sitting on my coffee table. The gold foil seemed to catch the ambient light of the room. Caitlin had chosen that venue because it represented her family's untouchable status. She wanted to stand in the grand ballroom surrounded by her wealthy friends and prove that she had won. She wanted to marry my ex-husband on ground that I could never even afford to step foot on. I want to buy the debt, I said softly. My heart was racing with a profound sense of purpose. I want to buy out the entire $5 million loan portfolio from those private lenders. Simone raised her eyebrows in surprise. You want to take over the club's debt? I do not just want to take over the debt, I clarified. I want to become their lifeline. If I buy out those loans, I become their primary creditor. And given their current state of financial distress, I will demand a restructuring agreement that grants me majority stakeholder rights. I want to be the silent owner of the Lakeside Heritage Club. Harrison steepled his fingers, his legal mind immediately grasping the magnitude of the strategy. It is a brilliant move, Rebecca. The private lenders will be thrilled to offload a high-risk, distressed asset for an immediate cash buyout. They will jump at the opportunity to take their money and walk away. And the country club board will be so desperate to avoid bankruptcy that they will agree to almost any terms we dictate as long as we keep the doors open and the staff paid. But we have to do it quietly, I insisted. I cannot have my name associated with the transaction, and we cannot use Apex Vanguard Holdings. If Richard Montgomery or Gavin somehow catch wind that I am involved, they will move the wedding to another location. They need to believe they are perfectly safe. Harrison nodded in agreement. We will create a completely new subsidiary corporate entity. We will route the remaining $5 million through a different blind trust. To the country club board, their new savior will simply be an anonymous private equity group that prefers to remain entirely in the shadows. They will be so relieved to be rescued that they will not ask any difficult questions. Get it done today, I instructed. I want the debt purchased and the new ownership structure finalized by the end of the week. The next few days felt like a masterfully orchestrated symphony. I remained in my penthouse, maintaining my routine of quiet isolation, while my team executed the complex financial takeover. I spent my mornings reviewing David's surveillance reports on Gavin's failing office construction, and my afternoons approving the legal documents Harrison sent over regarding the country club. The private lenders holding the club's debt were indeed ecstatic to wash their hands of the impending bankruptcy. They accepted our all-cash buyout without a single moment of hesitation. By Thursday afternoon, Harrison arrived at my hotel suite with the final transition documents. The subsidiary corporate entity we had created was now the primary creditor and majority stakeholder of the Lakeside Heritage Club. The transition was completely seamless and entirely invisible. The wealthy members golfing on the pristine greens had no idea that ownership had quietly changed hands. The catering staff preparing menus for the upcoming wedding season had no idea that their paychecks were now funded by my inheritance. And Richard Montgomery, sitting proudly in the board meetings, had absolutely no idea that his beloved country club was now completely controlled by the woman his future son-in-law had carelessly thrown away. I sat on my velvet sofa, holding the signed legal documents in my lap. I traced the edge of the thick paper, feeling an overwhelming sense of control. I had effectively purchased. Every single step Gavin and Caitlin took on their wedding day would be on my property. They would say their vows under my roof. They would toast to their false success with champagne chilled in my refrigerators. I smiled to myself, imagining the absolute perfection of the trap I had built. The stage was beautifully set. The players were in position. I just had to wait for the curtain to finally rise. The morning after the Lakeside Heritage Club takeover, Gregory Mitchell called me from the management office at Cascade Tower. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man finally permitted to enforce rules others had treated as suggestions. Gavin had requested an immediate extension on every outstanding construction fine. He wanted the penalties frozen until after his launch party, claiming that the delays were caused by the building rather than his unauthorized demolition. The request threatened negative publicity and promised Richard Montgomery would guarantee every obligation. I read the letter while Harrison sat across from me. Gavin had written it in the polished executive language I had helped him master, but beneath the expensive vocabulary was naked panic. The lease authorized immediate payment demands after repeated violations. No grace period remained. I asked Mitchell to deny the request in writing and deliver a final notice before noon. The full balance would be due Friday at noon, the beginning of Gavin's wedding weekend. If the money was not received, Montgomery Digital Solutions would lose access to the 42nd floor and formal commercial eviction proceedings would begin. The timing mattered because the same investors Gavin hoped to impress at the launch party would already be gathering at the club for the wedding weekend under Richard's watch. Mitchell did exactly as instructed. David watched from across the street as a courier entered Cascade Tower and returned 10 minutes later. Moments later, Gavin appeared in the lobby, clutching the notice until it folded beneath his fingers. He stormed toward the management office, but Mitchell refused to meet with him without counsel present. Gavin then called the corporate number for Apex Vanguard Holdings, demanding to speak with the owner. The receptionist transferred him through 3 departments before explaining that ownership would communicate only through the lease administrator. For the next hour, Gavin tried every tactic that had worked throughout his career. He threatened, he flattered, he invoked Richard's name. He claimed the renovation violations were minor misunderstandings. Finally, he offered partial payment if the balance could be postponed 30 days. Mitchell rejected every proposal and repeated the deadline without changing a single word. By late afternoon, Gavin understood that charm would not open this particular door. Simone arrived at my suite with a live reconstruction of Montgomery Digital Solutions' finances. The picture was worse than expected. Gavin had consumed nearly all Richard's seed capital through the lease deposit, imported materials, rushed fees, and penalties. Payroll was due in 5 days. A software demonstration promised to potential investors had not been completed. The launch party invitations claimed the company would unveil a functioning sales platform, but the development vendor had stopped work after 2 invoices went unpaid. Gavin needed money for fines, payroll, permits, and the wedding, but lacked enough cash to cover even 2 obligations. At 9 that evening, the first transfer appeared. Gavin moved money from the company's operating reserve into a temporary account he controlled personally. He labeled it an emergency facilities expenditure, attempting to make the diversion look like a normal business payment. Less than 20 minutes later, he wired most of that amount to Cascade Tower Management. It reduced the penalties, but did not satisfy the full balance. He was still hundreds of thousands of dollars short. The following morning, he crossed the line that would destroy him. Richard had placed the remaining wedding funds in a dedicated account so Gavin could settle the final catering, floral, music, and security invoices. Gavin transferred a large portion of that money into the same temporary account, then sent another payment to the building. Simone captured the transaction sequence through the financial records our investigators had lawfully obtained from cooperating vendors and corporate filings. Gavin tried to disguise the source by breaking the transfers into smaller amounts, but the timestamps formed a clear trail from Richard's wedding budget to the commercial penalties. Caitlin noticed the first warning sign that afternoon. Her florist called to say the final payment had not arrived. David's surveillance team observed her confronting Gavin outside a luxury bridal boutique. Gavin smiled, kissed her forehead, and showed her a banking screen on his phone. He claimed a routine fraud alert had delayed several wedding payments and promised everything would clear within 24 hours. Caitlin accepted the explanation because believing him protected the perfect future she had already advertised to everyone she knew. Gavin's company did not receive the same reassurance. On Thursday morning, the software vendor formally suspended the demonstration project. The missed delivery meant Montgomery Digital Solutions could not meet the operational milestone promised in the investor agreement. Without a working platform, the launch party would expose an empty office and a company with nothing to sell. 2 senior employees resigned before lunch after their payroll deposits failed to appear. One of them forwarded the suspension notice to Arthur Bell, a friend of Richard's, who had agreed to participate in the next funding round. Arthur called Richard immediately. By mid-afternoon, Richard's personal controller had begun comparing the original investment schedule with the new expenses Gavin had reported. The numbers did not align. Large amounts listed as technology development had been paid to a commercial property manager. Construction costs appeared twice, under different descriptions. The wedding account showed withdrawals that no approved vendor had received. Richard called Gavin and demanded an explanation. David recorded only Gavin's side of the conversation from a public corridor outside his office. Gavin paced behind the unfinished glass walls, promising that every discrepancy was temporary. He blamed the building owner, the city permit office, a dishonest contractor, and an incompetent junior accountant who did not exist. Richard did not accept the performance. He ordered Gavin to attend an emergency investor meeting at the Lakeside Heritage Club at 3 o'clock the next afternoon, only hours before the rehearsal dinner. Every investor who had committed money or reputation to the launch would be present. The moment the call ended, Gavin began manufacturing a defense. He ordered his exhausted assistant to assemble revised financial statements overnight. He created invoices for consulting work that had never occurred and instructed a contractor to change the descriptions on old receipts. He drafted a presentation blaming the office delay on new building policies, hoping Richard would believe the fines were an act of extortion rather than the consequence of Gavin's own violations. By midnight, his office lights were still burning above the Seattle skyline. From my penthouse, I watched the updates arrive one after another. The final payment had reached Cascade Tower minutes before the deadline, saving Gavin from immediate lockout. But it had cost him the money required to keep both his company and his wedding functioning. He believed he had purchased a few more days. In reality, he had created the evidence that connected every part of his fraud. I called Thomas at the country club and confirmed that the private boardroom would be ready for Richard's meeting. I asked him to preserve every payment request connected to the rehearsal dinner and to alert me the instant Gavin's card was presented for the remaining balance. Then I told David and Simone to prepare the financial timeline on my secure laptop. At 3 o'clock the next afternoon, Gavin would have to explain missing capital, a failed product, unpaid employees, and a drained wedding account to the people whose approval controlled his entire future. The battlefield was no longer waiting for the wedding. It was opening one floor above the rehearsal dinner. Thomas had authorized David to connect a secure audio relay to the boardroom's built-in conference system before the emergency meeting. Because the room belonged to the club, I now controlled, the equipment was installed openly by the club's technology contractor, removing any need for trespassing or bribery. The feed was crystal clear and streamed directly to the secure laptop on my penthouse desk. I poured myself a glass of iced tea, feeling my pulse settle into a calm, predatory rhythm. Simone sat beside me with the verified banking timeline we had assembled from vendor records management statements and the company's available financial disclosures. Every payment had been placed in chronological order. We were not waiting to discover what Gavin had done. We were waiting to hear which lie he would choose when Richard demanded an explanation. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon, leaving Gavin with a terrifyingly narrow window before he was expected to smile and mingle at his own rehearsal dinner downstairs. I turned up the volume as the heavy boardroom doors clicked shut. The ambient noise of the country club vanished, replaced by the tense silence of wealthy men expecting answers. Richard Montgomery spoke first. His voice was a low, commanding rumble that demanded absolute authority. He did not bother with pleasantries. He immediately asked Gavin why Montgomery Digital Solutions was bleeding capital at an unprecedented rate while showing absolutely zero operational progress. He demanded to know why the beautiful open-concept office space he had toured weeks ago was currently a lockdown construction zone wrapped in yellow tape and legal warnings. I closed my eyes and pictured Gavin standing at the head of that table. I knew his tells. He would be shifting his weight from his left foot to his right, running his thumb over his expensive watch, preparing to weave a masterful web of deceit. Gavin cleared his throat, the sound magnified by the hidden microphone. He launched into a meticulously rehearsed explanation. He spoke about aggressive expansion strategies and the unforeseen complexities of retrofitting a historical skyscraper for modern digital infrastructure. He threw around tech jargon, trying to dazzle the room with buzzwords about scalable synergy and bandwidth optimization. It was the exact same smooth, confident tone he had used for years to charm his way out of missed anniversaries and forgotten promises. He sounded so convincing that a lesser man might have apologized for doubting him. But Richard Montgomery was not a naive suburban wife. He was a ruthless corporate titan who had built an empire by tearing through empty promises. He cut Gavin off mid-sentence, his tone dripping with cold skepticism. He stated that he did not care about bandwidth. He cared about the massive financial penalties listed on the revised budget report. He demanded to know why Gavin was paying exorbitant daily fines to the building management instead of paying contractors to finish the office space. Gavin scrambled to maintain control of the narrative. He claimed the building management company had suddenly changed their policies, acting in bad faith, to extort new tenants. He lied smoothly, assuring Richard and the other investors that his legal team was already preparing a countersuit that would nullify the fines and recover their lost capital. It was a beautiful, desperate fabrication. Gavin had no legal team capable of fighting Apex Vanguard Holdings, and he knew he was legally bound to pay every single dollar of those penalties or face immediate eviction. Simone tapped my arm and pointed to a new file appearing on Richard's secure investor portal. Gavin had uploaded a revised ledger while he was speaking. I leaned closer. He had relabeled payments to Cascade Tower as enterprise infrastructure expenses and divided withdrawals from the wedding account among several invented vendors. The raw transaction dates did not change, so the false report only created a second layer of evidence. Over the audio feed, Richard asked about one payment that had been described as a software licensing fee. Gavin answered without hesitation, claiming it secured a proprietary platform for the launch. Simone highlighted the recipient on our verified timeline. The money had gone directly to Cascade Tower Property Management. Gavin was lying in real time while the proof sat on the screen in front of us. Over the audio feed, one of Richard's high society friends, an investor named Arthur, chimed in. Arthur noted that the launch party was supposed to be next week, but his connections in city planning indicated Gavin had not even secured basic demolition permits. Arthur asked bluntly if the company was already insolvent before it had even opened its doors. The panic in Gavin's voice became palpable. He raised his pitch slightly, a defensive reflex I recognized instantly. He assured Arthur that the permits were simply delayed by municipal bureaucracy. He was doubling down, piling catastrophic lies on top of a foundation made of sand. He was so terrified of losing Richard's approval and the Montgomery fortune that he was willing to say absolutely anything to survive the next 5 minutes. Richard slammed his hand down on the oak table. The loud crack echoed through my laptop speakers. He told Gavin that he did not invest his reputation and his money into a venture that required bribing city officials. He demanded full transparency. He wanted complete access to the company's financial ledgers, the raw banking data, and every single receipt for the construction materials. He gave Gavin exactly 48 hours to produce the documents, warning him that if a single penny was unaccounted for, he would pull his funding and dissolve the partnership immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gavin murmured a weak sound of agreement, promising to have his accounting department forward the files by Monday morning. He had no accounting department. He was a man standing on a trapdoor with the rope tied tightly around his own neck. Before Richard could adjourn the hostile meeting, the heavy boardroom door opened again. The intrusion was highly irregular for a closed-door investor meeting. I smiled, recognizing the precise timing of my trap. I had instructed Harrison to coordinate with the country club's general manager, a man who now answered directly to my subsidiary shell company. The manager's voice was apologetic but firm. He addressed Richard directly, ignoring Gavin entirely. He apologized for the interruption, but stated there was a critical, time-sensitive issue regarding the rehearsal dinner scheduled for that evening. Richard, already simmering with rage, asked what could possibly be wrong with the dinner. The manager cleared his throat, feigning profound discomfort. He explained that the catering and event staff required the final payment to be settled before they could begin food service. He stated that the credit card on file, which belonged to Gavin, had just been declined for insufficient funds. He added that they had attempted to run the transaction 3 times, and the bank had placed a hard freeze on the account due to suspicious transfer activity earlier that morning. I closed my laptop, savoring the destruction radiating through the audio feed. Richard's voice dropped to a lethal register, demanding to know where the wedding money went. Gavin stammered frantically, blaming a ridiculous bank glitch and desperately begging for more time. Richard instructed the manager to charge his personal account, then told Gavin to attend the dinner and pretend everything was perfect. He promised a full forensic audit tomorrow morning. Gavin was left sitting alone, completely out of options. I smiled, reaching out and pulling my gorgeous emerald gown from its velvet hanger. It was time to get ready for a party. The silk of the emerald gown slipped over my shoulders with the cool weight of heavy water. I stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse bedroom and stared at the woman looking back at me. She was no longer the exhausted, neglected wife who had begged for her husband's attention just months ago. She was not the weeping woman sitting in a lawyer's office learning her marriage had been legally erased to protect Gavin's promotion stock options and stolen house. The woman in the mirror was a predator armored in silk and armed with an invisible empire. I fastened a delicate diamond clasp at my throat and smoothed the fabric down my hips. The dark green color brought out a predatory brightness in my eyes. Simone had arranged for a private car to wait downstairs. I picked up a small black evening clutch, slipped my phone inside, and walked out of the suite. The ride from downtown to the Lakeside Heritage Club took exactly 40 minutes. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows, letting the rhythmic hum of the tires steady my breathing. For years, I had believed that success meant building a quiet, honest life with the man I loved. Now I knew that true power meant holding the absolute capacity to dismantle someone else's reality without ever raising your voice. The car turned onto the long, manicured driveway of the country club. Tall oak trees lined the winding path, their branches illuminated by hidden landscape lights. At the end of the drive, the grand clubhouse loomed like a fortress of old money and exclusive privilege. The valet rushed forward to open my door the moment the tires crunched to a halt on the crushed gravel driveway. I stepped out into the cool evening air, ignoring the curious glances of the wealthy patrons lingering near the grand entrance. I bypassed the main reception desk and walked directly toward a set of heavy mahogany doors leading to the administrative wing. The moment I crossed the threshold, a tall, impeccably groomed man in a tailored charcoal suit practically sprinted down the corridor to greet me. It was Thomas, the general manager of the Lakeside Heritage Club. Harrison had briefed him extensively on my identity and my absolute authority. To the outside world, this venue was governed by an elite board of directors. To Thomas, I was the sole entity keeping the club out of bankruptcy, the anonymous savior who held his career and his pension in the palm of her hand. "Good evening, madam," Thomas said, his voice dropping to a discreet, reverent murmur. "We have been expecting you. Everything is prepared exactly to your specifications." He bowed his head slightly, treating me with a level of deference reserved for royalty. It was a stark contrast to the way I had been treated during my marriage, always positioned as the burdensome accessory to Gavin's rising star. I nodded smoothly, allowing Thomas to lead the way. "Is the Montgomery party currently in the building?" I asked, my voice echoing faintly against the marble floors. "Yes, Madam," Thomas replied, matching his pace to mine. "They are currently transitioning from the boardroom to the main lobby. The rehearsal dinner is scheduled to begin in the garden pavilion in exactly 45 minutes. I have instructed the catering staff to proceed with the service per your authorization to cover the declined payment through the club's emergency reserve." He smiled conspiratorially. Mr. Montgomery was utterly humiliated by the incident with the credit card. The tension among their group is quite severe. "Excellent work, Thomas," I said, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Show me to the mezzanine. I want to see them before they move to the pavilion." Thomas led me up a private carpeted staircase restricted to executive staff. At the top of the landing, he unlocked a discreet door that opened into a darkened observation lounge. The space featured a massive, soundproof glass wall that overlooked the grand lobby below. From this elevated vantage point, I had an unobstructed panoramic view of the crystal chandeliers, the sweeping double staircases, and the plush seating areas where the club's elite members congregated. It was the perfect predator's perch. I stepped up to the glass and looked down. The lobby was bustling with elegantly dressed guests, but my eyes immediately locked on to a small, tense group standing near the massive stone fireplace. Gavin was there. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit that likely cost more than my first car, but the expensive fabric could not hide the frantic, desperate energy radiating from his every movement. He was sweating. Even from 20 feet above, I could see the sheen of perspiration on his forehead. He was shifting his weight erratically, his hands gesturing in wide, pleading motions as he spoke to Richard Montgomery. The older man stood as rigid as a statue, his arms crossed over his chest, his face carved into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. I watched Gavin's lips moving rapidly. He was undoubtedly spinning another web of frantic lies, trying to explain away the declined credit card, the missing construction permits, the evaporated investment funds, and the humiliating boardroom confrontation. He was likely blaming bank errors, malicious contractors, and accounting glitches. He was desperately trying to patch the massive holes in a sinking ship, terrified of losing the Montgomery fortune that was supposed to secure his future. Richard did not say a single word. He simply stared at Gavin, with eyes as cold and unforgiving as winter ice. The power dynamic was entirely one-sided. Gavin was a drowning man, begging for a life preserver, and Richard was calmly watching him sink. Then the heavy front doors of the lobby opened, and Caitlin Montgomery swept into the room. She was surrounded by a flock of bridesmaids, all carrying garment bags and laughing loudly. Caitlin wore a stunning white silk cocktail dress, radiating the arrogant glow of a woman who believed her life was a perfect, untouchable fairy tale. She spotted Gavin and immediately broke away from her friends. The transformation in Gavin was instantaneous and deeply pathetic. The moment he saw Caitlin approaching, he forced his panicked expression into a mask of easy, confident charm. He smoothed the lapels of his suit, wiped the sweat from his brow, and stepped forward to greet his future bride with a wide, manufactured smile. He caught her by the waist, kissed her cheek, and laughed at something she said, pretending that he was not completely suffocating under a mountain of debt and impending legal ruin. I watched Richard Montgomery observe this interaction. The older man's jaw tightened in disgust. He knew Gavin was lying to his daughter. He knew the perfect fiancé was a fraud, but he was holding his tongue for the sake of the rehearsal dinner, waiting for the forensic audit to confirm his suspicions tomorrow morning. Gavin genuinely believed he had smoothed things over. He thought he had survived the emergency meeting and bought himself enough time to figure out a miraculous solution. He thought he was safe for the night. He had absolutely no idea that the woman he had discarded and robbed was standing in the shadows directly above him. He did not know that I owned the walls surrounding him, the floor beneath his expensive shoes, and the very air he was breathing. I rested my palm against the cool glass and smiled. The trap was set. I turned away from the observation glass and walked toward the heavy oak door leading to the executive staircase. The carpet absorbed my footsteps, but my heartbeat pounded a steady, triumphant rhythm. For months, I had cultivated a quiet, invisible existence. I had stayed in the shadows, letting my legal team and my financial maneuvers speak for me. But tonight required a different strategy. Tonight, I needed them to see me. I needed them to look at the woman they thought they had discarded and feel the first icy prickle of genuine fear. I descended the staircase with deliberate slowness. The emerald silk of my gown draped perfectly around my legs, the heavy fabric moving like liquid glass with every step. I felt a profound sense of ownership over the building and the narrative of my own life. I reached the landing that connected to the public areas and paused for a moment to smooth my hands over the cool silk. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of expensive floral arrangements fill my lungs. Then I pushed open the double doors and stepped out onto the mezzanine gallery that wrapped around the upper level of the main lobby. The transition from the dark, quiet observation room to the brightly lit venue was jarring, but I maintained a perfectly serene expression. I walked along the gallery railing, ensuring my posture was absolutely flawless. I was a predator, stepping out into the open clearing. I reached the top of the grand double staircase that swept down into the center of the lobby. This was the moment. The Lakeside Heritage Club lobby was designed to overwhelm the senses with wealth. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the imported marble floors. Rich mahogany paneling lined the walls, adorned with classical oil paintings. The air hummed with the sophisticated chatter of Seattle's elite society. Men in tailored dinner jackets and women in designer cocktail dresses mingled in small, exclusive clusters. I placed my right hand on the polished brass railing and began my descent. I did not rush. I took each marble step with the unhurried grace of a woman who owned the world. Heads began to turn. It started as a subtle ripple of attention. A woman standing near a massive floral display stopped her conversation, her eyes tracking my movement. A wealthy businessman lowered his champagne flute, nudging his companion. As I reached the halfway point, a noticeable hush fell over the immediate area. I was a stranger in their highly guarded sanctuary, and I was dressed in couture that easily outshined everyone in the room. I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead, projecting an aura of untouchable confidence. I reached the bottom of the staircase and stepped onto the marble floor. My target was the stone fireplace on the far side of the room. Gavin, Caitlin, and Richard Montgomery had been joined by a new arrival. Standing beside Gavin, practically vibrating with nervous, arrogant energy, was his mother, Patricia. Patricia had spent her adult life pretending to be richer than she actually was. She wore a severe, heavily structured silver dress that looked uncomfortably tight around her shoulders. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid helmet, and her neck was draped in thick, gaudy jewelry that tried entirely too hard to look like family heirlooms. During my marriage to Gavin, Patricia had made it her personal mission to remind me of my supposedly inferior status. She had criticized my cooking, my career, and my inability to provide her with a grandchild. She had treated me like an unfortunate blemish on her son's path to greatness. Seeing her standing there, desperately trying to impress Richard Montgomery with overly enthusiastic laughter, filled me with a cold, sharp thrill. I adjusted the small black clutch in my hand and walked directly toward them. My path took me straight through the center of the lobby. The crowd naturally parted to let me through, drawn by the sheer magnetism of my presence. I was less than 20 feet away when Patricia finally turned her head and saw me. The transformation on her face was spectacular. Her mouth fell open, freezing her artificial laugh into a grotesque mask of shock. Her eyes widened, taking in the emerald designer gown, the diamond clasp at my throat, and the absolute lack of fear in my expression. She blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination. Patricia raised a trembling hand and pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. Gavin, who had been frantically checking his phone, looked up to see what his mother was pointing at. The color instantly drained from his face. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost walk out of a grave. His mouth worked silently, but no sound came out. He recognized the dress, he recognized the diamonds, and he recognized the terrifying reality that I was standing in the most exclusive country club in the state, looking like I belonged there. Caitlin turned next. Her smug, radiant glow evaporated the second her eyes locked onto mine. She instinctively took a half step backward, bumping into one of her bridesmaids. For a long, agonizing moment, the three of them simply stared at me in complete silence. The wealthy guests surrounding us sensed the sudden sharp drop in the atmosphere and quietly stepped back, creating a wide circle around the impending collision. I did not stop walking until I was standing less than 5 feet away from them. I offered a slow, pleasant smile. "Good evening, Patricia," I said. My voice was perfectly modulated, carrying clearly over the quiet ambient noise of the lobby. "It is lovely to see you again." Patricia's initial shock violently morphed into pure, unadulterated rage. The very idea that I was standing in her presence, holding my head high and refusing to cower, was an insult she could not process. Her face flushed a dark, angry red. "What are you doing here?" Patricia demanded. Her voice was shrill and painfully loud, completely abandoning any pretense of country club etiquette. She took a step toward me, her posture aggressive and threatening. "How did you even get past the front door?" "You do not belong here." I kept my hands relaxed at my sides, refusing to flinch. "I am simply enjoying the evening, Patricia," I replied smoothly. "It is a beautiful venue. Do you not agree?" Patricia let out a loud, mocking scoff that echoed off the marble walls. "Do not play games with me," she sneered. "I know exactly what you are doing. You are stalking my son. You are a pathetic, obsessed woman who cannot accept that Gavin has moved on to a better life. You found out about the rehearsal dinner, and you scraped together your last pennies to rent that ridiculous dress just to come here and cause a scene." I glanced at Gavin. He was sweating profusely again, his eyes darting frantically toward Richard Montgomery, who was watching the exchange with an expression of deep disgust. Gavin was terrified that my presence would expose his lies. Patricia did not wait for my response. She turned her head and snapped her fingers loudly in the air, a harsh, demanding sound. "Security!" she yelled, her voice echoing across the entire lobby. "I need security over here immediately! My son's crazy broke ex-wife has sneaked into the building and is harassing our family. I want her removed right now." Two burly security guards in dark suits immediately detached themselves from the discreet perimeter of the lobby and began walking purposefully toward our small circle. The wealthy guests surrounding us fell into a hushed, breathless silence, their eyes darting back and forth between my emerald gown and Patricia's flushed, furious face. Patricia crossed her arms over her chest, her chin raised in a posture of absolute triumph. She genuinely believed she had won. She believed that within seconds she would have the immense satisfaction of watching me dragged out of the country club like a common trespasser. I did not move a single muscle. I did not shift my weight, and I did not look at the approaching guards. I kept my gaze locked entirely on Gavin, watching the sweat bead along his hairline. The heavy footsteps of the security personnel echoed sharply against the polished marble floor. They were less than 10 feet away when a voice sliced through the tense, heavy air of the lobby. "Stop right there." The command was sharp, authoritative, and completely unapologetic. The two security guards froze instantly, turning their heads toward the source of the voice. Thomas, the general manager of the Lakeside Heritage Club, was walking rapidly across the lobby floor. He bypassed the security guards entirely, not even offering them a second glance, as he stepped directly into the tense circle between Patricia Gavin and me. Patricia smiled, assuming the manager was arriving to personally handle my eviction. She opened her mouth to speak, likely to demand an apology for the breach in security, but Thomas did not look at her. Instead, he stopped directly in front of me, smoothed the lapels of his immaculate charcoal suit, and offered a deep, formal bow. It was not a casual nod of greeting. It was a gesture of profound respect, the kind of deference reserved strictly for the highest level of ownership. "Good evening, Ms. Rebecca Thomas," said his voice, carrying clearly over the dead silence of the room. "Please forgive the interruption. We are so incredibly honored to have you visiting the club tonight." He stood up straight, keeping his hands clasped politely behind his back. "The catering director asked me to find you. We have just received the new shipment for the vintage champagne inventory." Thomas continued speaking as if we were the only two people in the entire building. He asked if I would like to personally inspect the bottles before they were moved into the primary climate-controlled cellars, noting that my approval was required for the final invoice. Patricia stared at Thomas as if he had just started speaking in a foreign language. Her jaw dropped open, and the angry, triumphant flush on her face rapidly drained away, leaving her pale and genuinely stunned. "Security," she stammered, her voice suddenly losing all of its shrill volume. "I told you to call security. This woman is harassing my family." Thomas finally turned his head to look at Patricia. His expression was perfectly polite, but his eyes were completely devoid of warmth. "I apologize for any confusion," Madam Thomas replied smoothly. "But Ms. Rebecca is our most esteemed guest this evening. We do not remove our VIP guests from the premises under any circumstances." Gavin stepped forward, his panic temporarily overridden by sheer confusion. He looked at Thomas, recognizing him as the man who had facilitated the venue rental, and then glared at me. A bizarre, manufactured confidence settled over his features as his mind desperately tried to rationalize what was happening. Gavin simply could not compute the idea that I held any actual power. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed terribly against the marble walls. "I get it now," Gavin sneered, shaking his head. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on the expensive silk of my dress and the diamonds at my throat. "You found yourself a sugar daddy who belongs to the club. That is how you got in here, is it not? You found some rich old man to buy you a dress and bring you to dinner so you could try to make me jealous." Gavin turned to his mother, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Do not worry about her, Mom. It is just a pathetic mistake. The staff probably thinks she is actually important because whoever she is sleeping with has a membership. We are not going to let her ruin Caitlin's night." Gavin turned his back to me completely, a physical gesture of total dismissal. He offered his arm to Caitlin and began guiding her toward the corridor that led to the garden pavilion. He genuinely believed he had figured it out. He thought he had successfully neutralized the threat by degrading me, completely unaware that his entire world was resting in the palm of my hand. Patricia glared at me one last time, her eyes burning with pure hatred, before lifting her chin and following her son. They were walking away to enjoy their rehearsal dinner, blissfully ignorant of the devastation waiting for them. I let them walk. I did not raise my voice, and I did not try to correct Gavin's insulting assumption. I turned my attention back to Thomas, who was watching the Montgomery party depart with a look of mild disgust. I opened my small black evening clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope sealed with dark red wax. The envelope contained exactly 50 copies of a highly detailed, legally verified financial dossier. I held the envelope out, and Thomas accepted it immediately, holding it with the utmost care. "This is not for the champagne inventory," I said softly, ensuring my voice did not carry beyond our immediate space. "Inside this envelope are printed documents detailing the complete forensic reality of Montgomery Digital Solutions. It includes the bank transfers Gavin authorized this morning to pay off his commercial eviction notices, the total depletion of the wedding budget, and the exact balance of his massive unpayable debt." Thomas nodded, slipping the thick envelope into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. "I understand perfectly, Ms. Rebecca. What are your precise instructions regarding these documents?" I looked toward the garden pavilion corridor, watching the last of Caitlin's bridesmaids disappear around the corner. "Make sure the catering staff serves these with the appetizers tomorrow," I instructed, my tone flat and uncompromising. "I want one placed on every single dinner plate at the reception. I want Richard Montgomery and every wealthy investor in his circle to have reading material while they eat." Thomas bowed again, a small, knowing smile touching the corners of his mouth. "It will be handled exactly as you request." I thanked Thomas and watched as he turned to walk back toward the administrative wing, the heavy envelope secured safely out of sight. The lobby was slowly returning to its normal volume, the wealthy patrons going back to their conversations and champagne flutes, completely unaware of the explosive trap that had just been set in motion. I stood there for a moment longer, taking a deep, steadying breath. Tomorrow, this beautiful sanctuary of old money and false prestige would become the epicenter of Gavin's absolute destruction. He would stand at the altar and promise a lifetime of wealth to a woman he had systematically robbed. I turned on my heel, the emerald silk of my gown sweeping gracefully across the marble floor. I did not need to stay. I had already won. The morning of the wedding arrived with a crisp blue sky over Seattle. I spent the early hours in my penthouse, sipping coffee and watching the city wake up below me. Simone arrived at noon with a garment bag from a private designer. We did not speak much. She helped me dress, her hands steady, as she fastened the closures of the midnight blue gown I had chosen for the occasion. It was a dress designed to command absolute authority, devoid of the flashy desperation Patricia favored. I paired it with a single diamond pendant and pulled my hair back into a polished style. I looked like a woman who owned the room before she even stepped foot inside it. By the time my private car pulled up to the Lakeside Heritage Club that evening, the sun had set, and the venue was illuminated like a palace. The grand ballroom was located on the ground floor, a sprawling space of gilded mirrors and massive crystal chandeliers. Thomas had ensured the catering staff followed my specific directives. I walked toward the main entrance, bypassing the lingering guests. Two security guards in dark suits stood flanking the grand mahogany double doors that led directly into the main reception hall. They saw me approach and immediately straightened their posture. They did not ask for an invitation. Thomas had briefed them thoroughly. To them, I was the apex predator of this particular ecosystem. Inside the ballroom, the reception was in full swing. Through the crack in the doors, I could hear the clinking of silverware against fine china and the gentle hum of elite society enjoying a multi-million-dollar celebration. Richard Montgomery had spared no expense for his daughter. I waited in the shadows of the foyer, timing my entrance perfectly. The jazz band brought their current song to a smooth close, and the designated master of ceremonies requested that all guests take their seats for the toasts. The ambient noise died down, replaced by the rustle of expensive fabrics. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the head table. Gavin stood at the front of the lavish reception hall, a wireless microphone gripped confidently in his hand. He was wearing a custom white dinner jacket, his hair perfectly styled, his teeth gleaming under the spotlight. Beside him sat Caitlin, draped in a bridal gown, smiling adoringly up at her new husband. Patricia was seated nearby, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction as she looked out over the sea of wealthy guests. Richard Montgomery sat rigidly next to Caitlin, his expression unreadable. Gavin tapped the microphone, the sound echoing sharply through the massive ballroom. He cleared his throat, flashed his trademark charismatic smile, and began to speak. He welcomed the guests, his voice dripping with smooth, manufactured charm. He thanked Richard Montgomery for his incredible generosity and vision, pausing perfectly to allow a ripple of polite applause. He spoke about his new company, Montgomery Digital Solutions, painting a glorious, entirely fictional picture of aggressive market expansion and unprecedented financial success. He lied with the practiced ease of a career salesman boasting about non-existent partnerships. He told the room that today was the merging of two great legacies. He raised his champagne flute, turning his dazzling smile toward Caitlin. He declared that she was his muse and partner. It was a sickening performance. He genuinely believed he had gotten away with everything. He raised his glass higher, preparing to deliver the final, triumphant line of his toast. That was my cue. I gave a subtle nod to the security guards flanking the entrance. Without a word, they reached out and pulled the heavy mahogany doors wide open. Gavin froze, his champagne flute hovering in the air. The words died in his throat. Every head in the vast room turned toward the sudden noise at the back of the hall. The spotlight that was focused on the head table seemed to catch the movement of the doors, drawing the collective gaze of 300 guests directly to me. I stood perfectly still on the threshold for one long, agonizing second, letting the reality of my presence wash over the room. I was a vision of absolute power, flanked by the very security team supposed to keep me out. I stepped into the ballroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me with a definitive, echoing thud. The silence in the room was absolute, a thick, suffocating quiet that magnified the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of an executioner. The sea of tables parted before me. Wealthy investors and high society matriarchs stared in confusion and growing alarm, sensing the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. I kept my gaze locked entirely on the head table, ignoring the whispers that began to ripple through the crowd. I watched the color completely drain from Gavin's face. The charismatic smile melted off his features, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He lowered his microphone slowly, his hand trembling so violently that a few drops of champagne spilled from his glass and stained his pristine white jacket. Beside him, Caitlin let out a sharp, audible gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as she recognized me. Patricia half stood from her chair, her jaw dropping open in a grotesque display of shock, her eyes darting frantically toward the security guards, silently demanding to know why I remained. I continued my steady march down the center aisle, my midnight blue gown gliding flawlessly over the floor. As I approached the front of the room, I noticed Thomas, the venue manager, standing discreetly near the kitchen service doors. He caught my eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The catering staff was ready. The heavy silver platters, loaded with the damning financial dossiers, were waiting just out of sight. I reached the edge of the elevated dance floor, stopping exactly 10 feet away from the main VIP table. Richard Montgomery stared down at me. His eyes narrowed, taking in my calm demeanor and the absolute lack of panic in my posture. He was a smart man, and I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew this was not the desperate act of a scorned woman. This was a calculated strike. I did not raise my voice, but in the dead quiet of the ballroom, my words carried perfectly. "Good evening, Gavin," I said, my tone as cold and clear as winter ice. "I truly apologize for interrupting such a beautiful, heartfelt speech, especially on a day that you have spent so much of your time and my stolen money planning. But I believe there is one crucial detail you forgot to mention to your lovely new bride and your esteemed investors." Gavin opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, choked sound emerged. He was completely paralyzed by panic. Patricia finally found her voice, her shrill tone shattering the tension. "Security!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at me. "Get this crazy, vindictive woman out of here right now! She is trespassing!" I did not even look at Patricia. I kept my eyes locked firmly on Gavin, watching his entire fraudulent empire crumble. He knew he was completely trapped. He knew I held the detonator. I smiled a small, lethal curving of my lips and prepared to deliver the final, devastating blow that would completely end his existence. Before Gavin could even force air into his lungs to yell for my removal, the heavy mahogany service doors near the kitchen swung open. The sound was sharp and perfectly timed, slicing right through the suffocating tension that had gripped the grand ballroom. I did not break eye contact with my ex-husband as the atmosphere shifted from shocked confusion to absolute bewilderment. Thomas had executed my precise instructions with the flawless discipline of a military general. From the shadows of the long service corridor, a massive line of 50 waitstaff marched out onto the polished hardwood floor. They moved in perfect synchronization, dressed in immaculate black and white uniforms, their faces carved into masks of strict professional neutrality. But they were not carrying the expected trays of delicate artisan hors d'oeuvres or expensive champagne flutes to celebrate the happy couple. Instead, every single server carried a massive, polished silver platter. The heavy metal caught the warm, golden light of the towering crystal chandeliers, flashing brilliantly as the staff fanned out across the vast reception hall. They bypassed the standard guest tables entirely, moving with deliberate, unhurried intention directly toward the VIP seating area and the front row tables, reserved strictly for Richard Montgomery's high-profile investors. The room was so quiet I could hear the synchronized soft thud of the servers' shoes against the floorboards. Patricia lowered her shaking hand, her mouth working silently as she desperately tried to comprehend this bizarre, terrifying disruption to her son's perfect evening. Gavin remained completely frozen, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the edge of the head table. On top of every silver platter sat a thick, beautifully bound legal folder. They were made of heavy midnight blue cardstock, secured tightly with thick bands of woven silk and sealed with a massive stamp of dark red wax. The presentation was deliberately theatrical, an undeniable display of supreme wealth and absolute uncompromising control. The servers reached the designated tables and, moving in flawless unison, lowered the platters. They did not distribute food. They placed one of the heavy red sealed folders directly onto the fine china dinner plate of every single VIP guest and investor in the room. The soft, heavy thuds of the thick dossiers hitting the expensive porcelain plates echoed like a series of small, damning gavels falling in a silent courtroom. One server stepped up to the elevated head table and gently placed a folder directly in front of Richard Montgomery. Another placed one in front of Caitlin, whose trembling hands hovered over her lap. A third server placed a folder in front of a completely horrified Patricia. The wealthy elite of Seattle stared down at the dark red wax seals, too stunned to immediately touch them. They exchanged bewildered, highly nervous glances. These were men and women who understood the hidden language of ultimate corporate power, and they recognized instantly that they had just been served something far more substantial than a simple wedding appetizer. I watched Richard Montgomery stare down at the heavy document resting on his plate. He was a ruthless, highly analytical man, and his cold eyes narrowed as he assessed the weight and the professional binding of the folder. He knew this was not a prank. I finally pulled my gaze away from the head table and turned my full attention to the elevated stage where the jazz band stood frozen in place. The lead singer, a man wearing a sharp tuxedo, was holding a wireless microphone against his chest, staring at me with wide, completely stunned eyes. I walked smoothly toward the stage, the heavy silk of my midnight blue gown gliding effortlessly across the polished floor. I did not ask for permission. I simply extended my right hand, palm up, and waited. The singer swallowed hard, looked out at the completely silent crowd, and then carefully placed the microphone into my outstretched hand. I nodded a brief, polite acknowledgement and turned back to face the sprawling ballroom. I let the silence stretch for just a few agonizing seconds longer, allowing the sheer weight of my presence to press down on the hundreds of wealthy guests. I raised the heavy microphone to my lips. The quiet electronic hum of the audio system vibrated through the massive space, amplifying the sound of my slow, steady breathing. When I spoke, my voice was perfectly modulated, projecting a calm, icy authority that commanded absolute, unquestioning attention. For those of you who do not know me, I began letting my words echo over the sea of silent, captivated faces. My name is Rebecca. Until very recently, I was the woman Gavin Montgomery relied on to quietly manage his life while he chased his grand ambitions. But tonight, I am not standing here as a bitter ex-wife looking to disrupt a beautiful celebration. I am standing here to properly introduce myself to the Seattle business community. I paused, letting my intense gaze sweep across the investor tables before locking eyes completely on Gavin. His face had gone from pale white to a sickly ash gray. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a crumbling cliff, staring down into an endless abyss. He knew exactly what was coming, but he was utterly powerless to stop the impending avalanche. I am the sole founder and chief executive officer of Apex Vanguard Holdings, I stated clearly. The impact of the name was instantaneous and explosive. A collective, audible gasp rippled through the grand ballroom. Apex Vanguard was not a secret in this room. It was the massive, highly secretive corporate entity that had been aggressively buying up prime commercial real estate and holding massive debt across the entire city. Wealthy investors shifted uncomfortably in their expensive seats, murmuring in shocked, panicked whispers. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, addressing the entire crowd with an unwavering, terrifying smile. Yes, I continued, my voice cutting easily through the rising tide of nervous whispers. That Apex Vanguard, the very same entity that fully owns the massive downtown commercial building where Montgomery Digital Solutions currently operates. Furthermore, I am the majority shareholder of the Lakeside Heritage Club. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, I am the owner of the very ground you are getting married on tonight. Patricia let out a choked, truly desperate sound, pressing her shaking hands against her chest as if she might faint. Caitlin shrank back in her chair, her bridal radiance completely extinguished by the terrifying reality of the powerful woman she had once mocked. Gavin physically swayed, his weak legs finally giving out as he collapsed heavily into his chair, staring at me with hollow, completely defeated eyes. I did not offer them a single ounce of pity. I turned my attention away from the pathetic display of my former family and focused entirely on the powerful man who held Gavin's remaining financial lifelines. I looked dead at Richard Montgomery. The older man was already reaching for the red wax seal on the folder sitting directly in front of him, his face carved into a mask of furious, absolute concentration. He broke the seal, the sharp cracking sound snapping through the tense air of the ballroom. As he flipped open the heavy cover, I raised the microphone one final time, delivering the words with the cold, lethal precision of a striking blade. You might want to check page 3. It details exactly how Gavin forged federal notary documents to hide his assets. If he is willing to commit a felony to defraud his wife, what do you think he is doing with your investment capital? The heavy silence that followed my question hung over the grand ballroom like a suffocating blanket. At the VIP tables, the sharp rustle of thick, high-quality paper was the only sound to be heard. Richard Montgomery did not look up immediately. His eyes darted across the pages of the dossier, his jaw tightening so severely I could see a pulse jumping in his cheek. Beside him, Caitlin was staring blankly at the documents, her perfectly manicured hands hovering over the damning bank statements showing zero balances and past due eviction notices for Montgomery Digital Solutions. The elite investors seated in the front rows were doing the exact same thing, their seasoned eyes quickly identifying the absolute financial ruin laid out before them in stark black and white. Page 3 contained the exact copies of the divorce papers Gavin had filed. It showed his signature, my forged signature, and the stamp of a corrupt notary public he had paid off. Page 4 contained the wire transfers, proving that the initial capital Richard Montgomery had invested into Gavin's company had not gone towards software development or market expansion. Instead, those funds had been immediately diverted to pay off Gavin's crippling commercial lease fines and to cover the exorbitant catering and floral deposits for this very wedding reception. Richard Montgomery finally raised his head. The man was a titan of industry, someone who did not tolerate failure and absolutely ruthlessly destroyed anyone who attempted to make a fool out of him. He slowly closed the red-sealed folder and placed it flat on the fine china plate. When he stood up, the sheer force of his anger seemed to drop the temperature in the entire room. He did not yell, but his voice was a low, terrifying growl that carried perfectly through the dead silent space. "You stole from me," Richard said, his eyes locked onto Gavin with murderous intent. "You took my capital, forged federal documents, and used my money to cover your own pathetic debts." Gavin opened his mouth, raising his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. "Richard, please, it is a simple misunderstanding. I can explain the cash flow. The market shifted and I needed to reallocate funds temporarily. It is all going to be replaced by the end of the quarter." "Do not insult my intelligence," Richard barked, slamming his fist down on the table with a force that made the crystal glasses rattle. "The documents are right here. You are a complete fraud. There is no company. There is no market expansion. You are facing commercial eviction from a building owned by the very woman you just tried to have thrown out." Richard turned his broad shoulders to the sea of investors who were watching the exchange with varying degrees of shock and rising anger. "Montgomery Digital Solutions is a scam," Richard announced loudly, ensuring every person in the room heard him. "I am pulling every single cent of my funding effective immediately, and my legal team will be filing embezzlement charges first thing Monday morning. I strongly advise all of you to do the same." The ballroom erupted into furious murmurs. Wealthy investors tossed their dossiers down in disgust, some pulling out their cell phones to immediately contact their own attorneys and financial managers. Caitlin, finally comprehending the sheer scale of the deception, stood up so fast her heavy wooden chair tipped backward and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "You lied to me!" she shrieked, her voice cracking as tears immediately ruined her flawless bridal makeup. "You told me you were a millionaire! You told me this entire wedding was paid for." "Caitlin, step away from that man right now!" Richard demanded, pointing a rigid finger at his daughter. "This marriage is over. My attorneys will begin the annulment process tonight." Caitlin burst into hysterical, hyperventilating sobs. She grabbed the heavy layers of her designer bridal gown and practically ran off the elevated stage, desperately putting as much distance between herself and Gavin as possible. Patricia watched her prospective daughter-in-law flee the final crushing realization of their destroyed status, hitting her all at once. The severe silver dress Patricia wore suddenly seemed to swallow her whole. The wealthy socialites she had spent the entire evening trying to impress were now staring at her with open disgust and pity. The elite society of Seattle was unforgiving, and Patricia had just been brutally exposed as the mother of a broke, thieving fraud. She let out a small, pathetic gasp, her legs giving way as she collapsed heavily into her chair. She buried her face in her hands, entirely humiliated, unable to look anyone in the eye, as the whispers of the city's elite swirled around her. Gavin was left standing completely alone at the head table. The pristine white dinner jacket he wore now looked ridiculous, a cheap costume on a man who had lost his entire world in less than 5 minutes. The sweat was pouring down his face, dripping from his chin and soaking into his collar. He knocked over his champagne flute as he backed away from Richard Montgomery, the expensive liquid spilling across the white linen tablecloth. He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving uncontrollably as he looked at the angry investors, his weeping mother, the empty space where his bride had been, and finally, at me. His pure, unadulterated panic violently shifted into unhinged desperation. He gripped the edge of the head table, his knuckles turning bone white, and glared at me with bloodshot, terrifying eyes. "You think you won?" Gavin screamed, his voice cracking as he abandoned any remaining pretense of sanity. He stepped out from behind the table, stumbling slightly, and pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You cannot do this to me! You are my wife! We are married!" The grand ballroom grew impossibly quiet again, as Gavin took another step forward, his chest puffing out with a bizarre, manufactured bravado. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate escape route. "Did you forget about the law, Rebecca?" he yelled, a hysterical, manic laugh escaping his throat. "Washington is a community property state. If you own Apex Vanguard Holdings, then that means I own half of it. You just stood up here and proved to everyone how rich you are. As your husband, I am legally entitled to half of that company, half of that real estate, and half of every single dollar you have in the bank." He turned his manic gaze to the crowd, spreading his arms wide, as if demanding they acknowledge his brilliant victory. "She is trying to ruin me, but she just made me a multi-millionaire. I own half of her holding company, and there is nothing she can do about it." Gavin stood there on the elevated stage, his chest heaving uncontrollably as a manic, desperate grin spread across his sweaty face. He looked around the grand ballroom, his eyes darting frantically between the retreating investors and the horrified wedding guests, as if he expected sudden applause for his brilliant realization. He genuinely believed he had found the ultimate legal loophole. He thought that by invoking the community property laws of Washington state, he had magically secured his financial future on the back of my success. The remaining elite guests watched him with a mixture of profound disgust and morbid fascination. I did not break my calm, icy demeanor. I stood perfectly still, letting his hysterical, manufactured laughter echo against the gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers of the silent room. I allowed him to enjoy his imaginary victory for just a few seconds longer before I raised the heavy wireless microphone to my lips one final time. My voice cut through his unhinged celebration with the cold, lethal precision of a surgical scalpel. "You would be entitled to half, Gavin," I said, letting the words ring out clearly through the massive audio system. The manic grin on his face faltered slightly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process my calm agreement. He nodded eagerly, taking a clumsy step toward the edge of the stage, but I held up my free hand to stop him in his tracks. "You would be entitled to half," I repeated, dropping my tone to a dangerous, unwavering register that commanded the attention of every person in the room. "But as you so cleverly and illegally arranged, completely behind my back, our divorce was finalized exactly 2 months ago." I watched the realization strike him with the devastating force of a physical blow. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, terrifying shade of gray. "You forged my signature? You bribed a corrupt notary public? And you rushed the fraudulent paperwork through the county courts to ensure I could not touch the fake company you were building with Richard Montgomery? You designed that entire scheme to leave me with absolutely nothing. So as a single, legally divorced woman, I kept my $20 million inheritance all to myself." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute and completely suffocating. Gavin stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as his brain completely shut down. The ultimate trap he had so carefully built to destroy me had become his own permanent, inescapable prison. Richard Montgomery did not hesitate for another second. He signaled sharply to his private security team and the terrified master of ceremonies. "This reception is over," Richard announced, his voice booming with undeniable authority over the stunned crowd. "Everyone out of this building right now!" The grand ballroom instantly erupted into sheer chaos. Wealthy investors scrambled from their seats, abandoning the red-sealed legal folders on the tables and rushing toward the exit to salvage their own financial reputations. Patricia burst into fresh, hysterical tears, slumping heavily onto the polished hardwood floor as the remaining waitstaff began awkwardly clearing the surrounding tables. No one offered a hand to help her up. Caitlin was already gone, having fled the premises the moment the absolute financial ruin was exposed to her influential family. I walked slowly up to the edge of the head table, where Gavin remained paralyzed by his catastrophic failure. He looked down at me with empty, hollow eyes, his breathing shallow and rapid. I reached into the small black evening clutch I had carried all night. I pulled out a single, neatly folded legal document. I did not hand it to him directly. I simply dropped it onto the white linen tablecloth, letting it land right next to the puddle of his spilled champagne. "That is your official commercial eviction notice," I told him quietly, amid the rising noise of the evacuating ballroom. "You have exactly 48 hours to clear your equipment out of my building before it is permanently seized to pay your massive back rent. Have a wonderful evening, Gavin." I turned around and walked gracefully out of the Lakeside Heritage Club, the heavy mahogany doors closing behind me with a definitive thud. The following months unfolded exactly as the financial dossiers had predicted. The fallout from that disastrous night was swift, brutal, and public. Richard Montgomery's attorneys filed civil claims to recover the diverted investment capital and delivered the transaction records, forged divorce documents, and false ledgers to the appropriate investigators. Gavin's remaining accounts were frozen as Montgomery Digital Solutions collapsed into bankruptcy. His attempts to explain the transfers only produced more contradictions. The forged papers he had used to steal my home became central evidence in the broader fraud and document forgery investigation. Caitlin began annulment proceedings the next morning, citing fraudulent financial representations, and the Montgomery family publicly severed every connection to Gavin and Patricia. Patricia lost her country club membership and the social standing she had spent years manufacturing. She eventually sold her heavily mortgaged home to help cover Gavin's mounting legal expenses. Gavin was left bankrupt, abandoned by the circles he had sacrificed everything to enter, and facing the criminal consequences of the evidence he had created himself. I do not follow their tragic updates in the news. I do not need to. I step out onto the expansive glass balcony of my new downtown penthouse, feeling the crisp, cool evening breeze off Puget Sound. The Seattle skyline glitters beautifully against the dark night sky, a vibrant tapestry of bright lights and endless possibilities. I lean against the smooth metal railing, listening to the quiet hum of the thriving city below me. I am not bitter about the past. I am not angry about the betrayal. The heavy burden of trying to fix a man who only wanted to destroy me is gone. I raise a glass to my great-aunt. I am entirely, beautifully free. Have you ever had someone completely underestimate your worth, only to prove them entirely wrong in the end? Share your own story of triumph in the comments below. If this tale of sweet revenge and personal freedom resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about claiming your power and walking away victorious.